My grandson David experienced his first winter this year. The weather report said it was a record cold day, and I couldn't help but worry about David and his mother, Yvonne. I hoped they hadn't gotten sick from the cold. That night, I sent Yvonne a message on my smartphone asking, "Are you and the baby okay? Not catching a cold?" But even though I sent it 2 or 3 times, there was no reply, not even a read receipt. She's always been so responsible, so I hoped she wasn't overdoing it. After waiting another hour, I tried calling, but there was no answer. Worried something serious had happened, I quickly put on my thick jumper and rushed out to drive to my son's family apartment. There was no response when I rang the intercom, and fearing the worst, that Yvonne had collapsed inside, I had the building manager open the door. The apartment was dark, with only light from the street lamps seeping in. Groping along the wall, I searched for the light switch. I fumbled for it several times, but the lights wouldn't turn on. What's going on here? I thought, feeling a mix of anxiety and irritation. With no other option, I used my smartphone's flashlight to look around. "Yvonne, are you there? Could they be out?" Just as I was about to leave, I thought I heard a baby's cry from the bedroom. "Yvonne, are you there?" I quickly headed to the bedroom. There, I found Yvonne shivering from the cold but desperately wrapping newborn David in a sheet to keep him warm. What happened? To my shock, Yvonne's once long and proud black hair was now chopped off, almost completely shaved. "This is terrible. What happened here?" "My name is Mary Smith. I'm 61 years old. I've worked as a hairstylist for many years, running a salon out of my home. Chatting casually with my regulars during their appointments has always been the highlight of my day. The salon was originally started by my husband and me. However, he passed away from cancer when he was young, not long after our son Harry was born. Despite the challenges, I raised Harry on my own, but Harry didn't make it easy. He often skipped school and got into trouble when he did attend. After graduating high school, he didn't continue his education, instead spent his days hanging out in town. I often wondered if he felt inferior because he didn't have a father around or if I wasn't a good enough mother. I always worried about Harry's future but never found an answer. So when Harry suddenly said one day, "I want to be a hairstylist," I was so surprised I pinched my cheek, thinking I was dreaming. "What's gotten into you?" I asked. "Hairstylists are popular with the ladies, right?" Harry replied with a smirk. "I guess kids do grow up watching their parents, huh?" Regardless of the reason, I decided to take a positive view of my son showing interest in his future for the first time. Harry successfully graduated from cosmetology school and started working as an apprentice at a senior salon. That's where he met Yvonne, who would later become his wife. Harry was smitten with her at first sight, and after a strong pursuit, he announced to me with a confident smile, "I've decided to marry this girl," introducing me to Yvonne. "Nice to meet you. I'm Yvonne. You were a hairstylist too, right? I look forward to learning from you." Yvonne, with her long black hair and bright smile, was a wonderful woman. "I look forward to that," I replied, instantly liking her. A year after their marriage, Harry expressed his desire to start his own salon. Though he hadn't been an apprentice for long, he seemed to have gained a lot of confidence as a hairstylist. "I want to have my own place and prove my skills." Honestly, I was a bit worried. I knew from my experience that it's not easy for a newcomer to make it on their own in this industry, but I couldn't ignore the earnest look in Harry's eyes as he talked about his dream. "How much do you have saved up?" I asked. He showed me his bank book with a troubled look and a sigh. Despite having a steady income, he was spending just as much as he earned. With this pattern, he was far from having enough to start his own business. Harry had been squandering most of his earnings on leisure. Perhaps I should have advised him to give up then, but I smiled and said, "Don't worry about the money." Indulging him was maybe my way of making up for the loneliness he felt growing up without a father. Truth be told, I hadn't touched the life insurance money left by my late husband. "It's for Harry. You forgive me, right?" I whispered to my husband's portrait. One of my regulars was knowledgeable in real estate, so I consulted with her. "That place would be perfect," she said. It was a property that had been used as a barber shop until half a year ago, but the owner had retired due to old age. The location wasn't bad, and she thought it might be just right for Harry's new start. During the renovation, one of my regulars said, "Use my husband. He just lazes around the house on his days off anyway." Another chimed in, "My son's studying architecture in college and is home for the summer break. He can help out too, get some hands-on experience." Thanks to their help, the construction went smoothly. Once we got the health department's approval, the salon opened in no time. I never imagined I could set up my own business so quickly. You should thank everyone. It's not something you could have done alone. I know. I'm grateful to you, Mom, Harry said. Then I handed Harry the bank book containing the remainder of his father's inheritance. The purchase and renovation costs were lower than expected, so there was still more than half left. This is a gift from your father to you. Use it wisely for business expenses and don't you dare waste it. Yeah, I'm not a kid. I get it, Harry said, chuckling in annoyance. Don't worry, I'll keep a close eye on Harry to make sure he doesn't spend the money foolishly, Yvonne said with a bright smile. Her words made me laugh. With Yvonne's help, I didn't need to worry about interfering any further. I optimistically decided to watch over their business from a distance. But soon, I realized my optimism was misplaced. Yvonne occasionally visited my salon to update me on their progress, and each time her expression grew more somber. 3 months after Harry's salon opened, she confided, "Harry's not putting his heart into the work." What? Harry, why? He was so enthusiastic at first. Sure, he thought his skills would bring in customers, but within a month, he stopped smiling and began treating customers coldly. As a result, our reputation has plummeted and customers have stopped coming. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Harry had wanted his own salon so badly. What had changed in such a short time? Harry thought that being a good hairstylist was all it took, but running a salon is more than that. Yvonne sighed. She was right. Business doesn't work on the quality of your work alone. Customer service plays a huge role in success. It seemed Harry was missing that fundamental understanding. So, what's Harry doing now? I asked. He's frustrated about the lack of customers and spends his days drinking. If he doesn't get his act together, we'll lose even more clients. Right now, I'm handling the customers we do have, but if our reputation keeps dropping, the business will only get worse, Yvonne explained, looking like she was on the verge of tears. I felt the same way. All right, I'll have a serious talk with him next time I see him. Thank you so much, Yvonne said, bowing deeply before brushing back her long black hair. Your hair is always so stunning, I commented, trying to lighten the mood. I started growing it out in middle school, she said proudly. Being that long, any particular reason? Are you familiar with hair donation? Yvonne looked at me earnestly. Hair donation? I think I heard about it at a hairstylist's meeting, but I don't know much about it. Yvonne's eyes sparkled as she explained, it's about making wigs from real hair for children who've lost their hair due to congenital diseases, illness, or accidents. I've been growing my hair to donate to organizations involved in this. Isn't it wonderful to be able to help someone? I read an article about an actress who was doing it and thought maybe I could do that too. Wow, that's really admirable, especially for someone as young as you, I said, overwhelmed by Yvonne's passion. 6 months into her marriage with Harry, Yvonne got pregnant. She's always been so conscientious, always pushing herself too hard. When I'm not looking, Yvonne, this is the most crucial time. You really shouldn't overdo it, I repeatedly warned her. She'd just lightly laugh and say, don't worry, I'm taking it easy, consulting with the baby in my belly. But in reality, Yvonne worked at the salon right up until the last month of her pregnancy, supporting the family while Harry's attitude worsened. Every time Yvonne updated me, I felt my own shortcomings as a mother. One day, I finished work early and decided to check on their salon. I ran into Harry just as he was about to leave. Where are you going? Out for a drink. There won't be any more customers today anyway, he said nonchalantly, laughing off the situation. The lack of customers had become normal for Harry, and he wasn't even trying to improve things anymore. You're about to become a father, you know. Harry just waved his hand dismissively and hopped on his motorcycle. We're not done talking. Think about Yvonne for once. Yeah, I'll do that when I feel like it. He laughed and sped off. Inside the salon, Yvonne was cleaning the floor. Today we managed to get just one customer, she said, smiling brightly despite looking exhausted. Are you eating properly? You need to get enough nutrition. Don't worry about me. It's not just about you, it's for the baby, I said sternly, making sure she understood the gravity of the situation. Yvonne teared up a bit and thanked me. At times like this, a father should be there to support her. I wanted to shout at Harry, who was nowhere to be found. Yvonne told me the salon wasn't doing well and that Harry was spending money recklessly every night. Giving that babe book to Harry was a mistake. I regretted my decision. Despite being busy, Yvonne never neglected her hair care. Gently stroking her belly, she said, "I want to teach my child the joy of helping others." That's when I realized I wanted to support her since my son wasn't of much help. I decided to assist Yvonne at their apartment. "I'm always sorry to trouble you." "Don't worry about it. Just focus on the baby," she replied. It was my fault for not raising my son right. Because of that, Yvonne was suffering. Perhaps it was my way of atoning for my sins. At least at the end of summer, Yvonne went into labor earlier than expected and was rushed to the hospital. Harry was nowhere to be found, unreachable. I kept sending him messages, but there were no replies, not even read receipts. What on earth is he doing at a time like this? Yvonne's parents had passed away, so I was the only one who could be there for her. "Don't worry, Yvonne, I'm here," I kept encouraging her as she bravely faced childbirth. After a long and difficult labor, I was overwhelmed by the sound of the baby's cries. "He's born? You did it, Yvonne," I said, moved to tears. But Harry, who should have been there, never showed up. My grandson David was experiencing his first winter. The weather report said it was a record cold day. No wonder it was so chilly that I had trouble getting out of bed. My first thoughts were of Yvonne and newborn David. I hoped they weren't affected by the cold. Worried, I sent a message to Yvonne that night. "Are you and the baby okay? Haven't caught a cold?" But even after sending 2 or 3 messages, there was no response, not even a read receipt. I was concerned that Yvonne might be too ill to move. She's always been so responsible. I hope she's not overdoing it. After waiting another hour, I tried calling again, but the result was the same. Something's not right. Without a second thought, I put on my thick jumper and rushed out to their apartment. When I arrived, the place was engulfed in darkness. It's not uncommon for families to travel abroad during the holidays, but I hadn't heard anything about a trip from Yvonne and Harry, and they likely couldn't afford it anyway. I rang the intercom, but there was no response, fearing Yvonne might have collapsed. I immediately asked the building manager to open the door. "I'll wait outside. Please let me know if there's anything," I told the manager before stepping inside. The apartment was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. I remembered the light switch was right by the entrance. Relying on my memory, I groped for the light switch on the wall. But no matter how many times I flipped it on and off, the lights didn't respond at all. "What's going on here?" I thought, feeling a mixture of anxiety and irritation. With no other option, I used my smartphone's flashlight to illuminate the room as I stepped inside. "Yvonne, are you here?" I called out in the living room, but there was no answer. Maybe they had just gone out. Just as I was about to leave, I thought I heard a faint cry of a baby from the bedroom. "Yvonne, are you in there?" I quickly headed toward the sound. There was Yvonne, shivering from the cold, desperately wrapping newborn David in a sheet to keep him warm. What happened here? When I shone the light on her, I was shocked to see that her once long, proud black hair had been roughly cut off, almost to the scalp. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, looked at me helplessly. "This is terrible. How did this happen?" I took off my jumper and draped it over Yvonne. "It's okay now. Just tell me what happened as much as you can." Yvonne began to speak slowly. She said that Harry had continued his daily escapades even after David was born. Eventually, they couldn't pay the electric bill anymore, and Yvonne, unable to bear it any longer, Yvonne scolded Harry. She had just wanted him to be more responsible as a father, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. In a fit of rage, Harry grabbed a pair of practice hair-cutting scissors and started cutting off Yvonne's hair. At first, Yvonne tried to resist, saying, "Stop it," but fearing any further resistance might accidentally harm David, she stopped resisting. Harry laughed mockingly, saying, "Now you won't be able to show your face in public." I was speechless at my son's cruel actions. "Why didn't you tell me it had gotten this bad?" I asked. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry," Yvonne apologized, blaming herself again. "No, Yvonne, it's not your fault. You're not the one to blame here. It's Harry. You did nothing wrong." I knew Yvonne hadn't confided in me because she didn't want to worry me. I hugged her tightly, tears streaming down my face. The whole situation was a result of my overindulgence in raising Harry. My heart burned with shame and anger at my own failings and my son's inability to empathize with others. Taking a deep breath, I called Harry. "Hey, Mom, long time no talk." "What's up?" he answered, calling all of a sudden. Just wanted to hear your voice. How's everything over there? Are Yvonne and David doing okay? Of course, everyone's fine and doing well. I've been calling home, but no one's picking up. Where are you now? There was a brief pause in his voice, as if he was concocting an excuse. Actually, we're a family of 3 in Hawaii. We'll be back next week. Hawaii, huh? That sounds nice, I responded, though I knew he was blatantly lying to me. What had I been doing all these years, taking care of Harry after losing my husband at a young age? I worked non-stop as a hairstylist. It was all to raise Harry into a respectable person. When he expressed a desire to become an independent hairstylist, I fulfilled his wish without hesitation. Yet Harry carelessly squandered the inheritance his father left, using it for his own pleasures and even mistreating his wife and child. My expectations for Harry turned into profound disappointment. What would you like as a souvenir? I'll bring you something nice, Harry asked. Anything's fine. You're coming back next week, right? Safe and sound, I replied. Hey, Mom, you sound a bit off. Is something wrong? Harry seemed to sense something, but I ended the call without responding. I informed the building manager waiting outside of my plans and decided to take Yvonne and David back to my house. Then I started making calls to every place I could think of. A week later, Harry called me cheerfully, announcing that he had just landed at the airport. I'm back, Mom, and I've got souvenirs for you, he said, pretending to be the caring son. But my heart was no longer deceived by his act. That's nice to hear, I replied in a flat tone, though Harry didn't seem to notice anything unusual. About an hour later, a taxi pulled up in front of the apartment. Harry, clearly having enjoyed his solo trip to Hawaii with distinct tan lines from sunglasses around his eyes, unloaded a bunch of luggage from the trunk. He took out his keys, expecting to enter the apartment. Where his wife and son should be waiting, he must have thought that once he inserted and turned the key, the door would open immediately. However, no matter how many times he tried, the key wouldn't fit the lock. What's going on here? He exclaimed in frustration. I approached him quietly from behind and asked with a smile, Did you enjoy your trip to Hawaii? Though my heart was boiling with anger. Mom, you're here, Harry said, relieved to see me, misunderstanding the situation. Listen, Mom, I just got back and tried to enter the house, but the key won't fit. It must be Yvonne's prank. Punishing me for going on a trip alone. He tried to paint himself as the victim, blaming Yvonne, leaving Yvonne, who just gave birth, and newborn David behind. What were you doing? I told you I was in Hawaii with my family, Harry protested, suddenly panicking. Didn't you just say you went on the trip alone? I pointed out the contradiction. Harry was at a loss for words. You really had the nerve to lie about taking a family trip to Hawaii. Yvonne was here with the electricity cut off, shivering in the cold, holding David close to protect him, and to think she cherished her long hair, and you just cut it off mercilessly. Don't you feel any remorse as a human being? I guess I messed up there, but right now I just want to get inside the house. It's freezing in Japan, Harry replied, rubbing his arms theatrically, showing no sign of remorse. The cold Yvonne and David endured is nothing compared to this. Plus, you no longer have a home here. I've already canceled the lease on the apartment. It's time you find your own place to live, I stated firmly. Cancel the lease. What? Why would you do something like that without asking me? Harry protested, suddenly panicking. But the apartment was leased under my name after all. I couldn't just stand outside and continue this conversation, so I took Harry to a nearby coffee shop to talk further. Harry sipped his coffee silently, probably not even tasting it. He kept glancing between me and his coffee with a pale face. You were so strapped for cash that you couldn't pay the electric bill, yet you managed to go to Hawaii, I said, watching Harry grimace. Finally, he began to spill his selfish reasoning. He admitted that right from the start of his business, he was showing off to friends and women he picked up at the salon, spending his father's inheritance on his antics. He knew such spending would quickly deplete any fortune, but after getting a taste of the power of money, he continued his lavish lifestyle even after the inheritance ran out, racking up debts to buy gifts and take trips. You're quite the big spender, aren't you, especially for a failing business? I remarked. Don't worry, I'm a professional hairstylist. Once I get serious clients, they will come flooding in, and I'll be able to support my family, Harry replied with unfounded confidence. I looked at him coldly. Your salon? I've already sold it, all the equipment too. It's too late to get anything back. I shattered his baseless confidence. That's a lie. Why would you do something like that? Harry's face turned red as he slammed his hand on the table. Oh, you were planning to continue with the salon? I thought you had abandoned it since you left everything to Yvonne. Besides, I bought the building and land in my name. You have no right to complain now, I retorted. But I was just trying to attract customers. I had it all planned out. Harry's eyes looked like those of a child about to burst into tears. If you're so confident in your skills, you should be able to start over from scratch, I said coldly, then left the coffee shop after placing money for the coffee on the table. A month passed, Yvonne and I avoided any contact with Harry. But unpleasant rumors inevitably reached my ears after I pushed him away. Harry apparently ran to his friends begging for money, but they were the kind who gathered around him for his money. Naturally, nobody was willing to help a financially drained Harry. He even got reported to the police for stalking some of the women he picked up at his salon. Although he only received a stern warning from the police, the lack of support from his acquaintances hit him hard, and he completely disappeared from our lives. He's probably living alone now in fear of harsh debt collectors. All this is the consequence of his own actions. My anger towards Harry isn't just about his reckless spending. What's unforgivable is how he neglected Yvonne and David, pushing them into hardship, and above all, cutting off Yvonne's long hair, which she had grown out for years for a noble cause, thereby potentially robbing unknown children of a brighter future. As a fellow hairstylist, I could never forgive Harry's actions. It will take a long time for Harry to truly understand the emotional pain Yvonne has endured. Yvonne herself never speaks of her hurt, but it's clear she's not unscathed. She appears to be keeping her feelings bottled up, probably not wanting to worry me. Wanting to do something to help, I reached out to my hairstylist friends and had a special wig made for Yvonne. It won't make up for my son's wrongs, but please use this, I said. Thank you, Mom, Yvonne said with a smile, though tears were streaming down her cheeks. Using my aching back as an excuse, I asked Yvonne to help out at the salon. She threw herself into the work, seemingly trying to forget her emotional scars. Hello, David, a regular greeted, and David in his cradle burst into giggles. Now some customers even come to the salon just to see him. He's like a little mascot, a baby that brings in good fortune. Yvonne, regaining her strength both physically and emotionally, has started the process of divorcing Harry. Seeing Yvonne's smile makes us all feel like we've shed 20 years, but it's true. Yvonne and David have brightened up the salon considerably. Attracted by Yvonne's cheerful atmosphere, more and more mothers with young children have become regulars. Let's have a great day today. Hi, how are you? Now the salon is filled with smiles again. In a quiet corner, David is peacefully sleeping, his cute little snores filling the air.
After the tragic death of my parents, my greedy husband and mother-in-law stormed into my house at night, demanding a share of my $50 million inheritance. When I refused, they both struck me brutally, leaving me severely injured. They kicked me out of my house at midnight, locking the door behind them as I cried for help, but they refused to listen. The very next day, I returned with revenge. When they woke up, they could never have imagined the shocking surprise that would bring them to their knees. My name is Lily Rose. I'm 40 years old, a financial consultant living in Seattle, Washington. My life wasn't always filled with betrayal and chaos. Just a few months ago, I thought I had everything: a loving husband, a fulfilling career, and two incredible parents who believed in me more than I ever believed in myself. But life has a cruel way of taking everything from you, piece by piece, until you're left fighting for survival. It all began when my parents passed away unexpectedly in a car accident. They were everything to me. Losing them so suddenly was like losing a part of myself. Their absence created a void that nothing could fill. But they didn't just leave me their love and memories, they left me their legacy, a $50 million estate. It wasn't just about the money. That inheritance symbolized their hard work, sacrifices, and dreams for my future. I swore to protect it with everything I had. At first, my husband, Jason, seemed supportive. We had been married for over 10 years, and I believed we were a team. Jason told me we'd honor my parents' memory together and take care of their estate responsibly. His mother, Martha, who had always been polite but distant, also appeared sympathetic at first. I was naive enough to believe they cared about me, and my loss. For the first few weeks after the funeral, I focused on organizing my parents' affairs. Their estate consisted of properties, investments, and businesses they had built from the ground up. Managing it was overwhelming, but I poured myself into the work. I wanted to make them proud, even in their absence. Then the cracks began to show. It started with little things, Jason making comments about how I needed to lighten the load and let him handle some of the finances. I brushed it off, thinking he was just trying to help. But then Martha began dropping hints, subtle at first, about how my parents' wealth should benefit the whole family. "Lily," she said one evening over dinner, her voice sweet but calculated, "don't you think your parents would have wanted Jason and you to share the fortune with those who've supported you? After all, family is everything." I smiled politely, trying to suppress my irritation. "Martha, my parents worked their entire lives for this. It's their legacy. I want to protect it and honor their memory." Her expression tightened, but she didn't argue further. I should have seen the warning signs, but grief blinded me. I convinced myself it was just a misunderstanding. Over the next few weeks, Martha's hints became sharper, more frequent. Jason began to echo her sentiments, suggesting we invest in properties or luxury items for the family. The tension in the house grew thicker with every passing day. One evening, Jason brought up the idea of buying a vacation home. "Lily, it'd be great for all of us. A place where we could gather, relax, and enjoy life. Think about it, it'd only cost around $5 million. It's nothing compared to the estate." I stared at him, disbelief coursing through me. "Jason, that's not what this money is for. My parents didn't leave it behind for vacations or luxury homes. They left it to secure the future, to build something meaningful." His face darkened, but he didn't push further. At least not then. Martha, however, didn't stop. She began visiting unannounced, inspecting my parents' home as if it were already hers. Her tone grew harsher, her words sharper. "You're being selfish, Lily," she said one afternoon, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your parents wouldn't want you hoarding their wealth while the rest of the family struggles. It's disgraceful." I clenched my fists, holding back the anger threatening to spill out. "This isn't about hoarding, Martha. It's about preserving what they built. You wouldn't understand because you didn't know them like I did." Her glare sent chills down my spine, but I refused to back down. Things took a darker turn one night. Jason and Martha arrived together, uninvited, their faces filled with determination. I was sitting in the living room, going over some documents, when they barged in. "We need to talk," Jason said, his voice cold and firm. I set my papers aside, uneasy. "What's going on?" Martha crossed her arms. "Enough of this nonsense, Lily. It's time you stop being so selfish and start thinking about the family. We're taking control of this estate, whether you like it or not." Her words sent a wave of anger and fear through me. "You have no right to take anything. This is my parents' legacy, and I won't let you destroy it." Jason stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Don't make this difficult, Lily. We've supported you long enough. It's time you give back." I stood up, trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Supported me? You mean manipulated me? You're not taking a single penny from my parents' estate." Martha's eyes narrowed, and Jason's jaw tightened. I didn't realize just how far they were willing to go. That night marked the beginning of the nightmare I never saw coming. I had no idea just how ruthless Jason and Martha could be until that fateful night. What started as a heated argument spiraled into something far more sinister, a night that would shatter any remaining illusion of trust one had in them. It was late, maybe 10 p.m. I was still reeling from the confrontation earlier that evening. Jason had barely spoken a word after Martha left, avoiding eye contact as he sat in the corner scrolling on his phone. The silence between us was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. Then, without warning, the front door slammed open. Martha stormed in, her face twisted with fury, and behind her was Jason, his expression unreadable but tense. My heart sank. I should have known they wouldn't let this go. "Lily, this ends tonight," Martha spat, her voice sharp and venomous. "You're going to sign over control of the estate, or we'll make sure you regret it. I stood my ground, though fear bubbled beneath the surface. You can threaten me all you want, Martha, but I'm not signing anything. This is my parents' legacy, and I won't let you ruin it. Jason finally spoke, his voice low and cold. Don't be stubborn, Lily. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign the papers. I looked at him, my husband of 10 years, the man I thought would always protect me. Jason, how can you do this? How can you stand there and side with her? I'm your wife. His eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or shame, but he didn't waver. You've left me no choice, Lily. Family comes first, and you're acting like this is all yours. It is all mine. I snapped, my voice trembling. My parents worked their entire lives to build this, and you have no right to take it from me. That's when Martha lost it. She lunged toward me, grabbing my arms so tightly that I winced. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed. If it weren't for us, you'd have nothing. Nothing. I yanked my arm away, my pulse racing. Get out of my house, both of you, I shouted, hoping my voice would mask the growing fear inside me. But they didn't leave. Instead, Jason stepped forward, his face hard as stone. You brought this on yourself, he said, and before I could react, he shoved me backward. I stumbled, hitting the edge of the coffee table and falling hard onto the floor. My body screamed in pain, but the physical ache was nothing compared to the betrayal burning in my chest. Jason, I whispered, looking up at him, my voice filled with disbelief. How could you? He didn't answer. Martha, emboldened by his actions, grabbed the documents she had brought with her and threw them onto the table. Sign them, she barked. Or you'll wish you had. I pushed myself to my feet, shaking. I'm not signing anything, I said firmly, though my voice trembled. And you'll regret this. Jason's expression darkened. Fine. If that's how you want to play it. Before I could process what was happening, he grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the door. I struggled, but he was stronger, and Martha was right there, blocking my escape. Let me go. I screamed, kicking and twisting, but they didn't stop. They opened the front door and pushed me out into the cold night. I tripped on the steps, landing hard on the pavement. The sharp chill of the night air bit into my skin as I scrambled to my feet. Martha's voice rang out behind me. Don't come back until you're ready to do what's right. The door slammed shut, leaving me standing there, battered and bruised, both physically and emotionally. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. My own husband and mother-in-law had just thrown me out of my house, like I was nothing. I didn't know where to go or what to do. My entire life had been upended in a single night. But as I stood there, shivering and humiliated, something inside me shifted. The fear and despair that had gripped me moments before began to give way to something else. Anger. How dare they? How dare they think they could take everything from me? My parents didn't work their entire lives to build this estate, so it could be handed over to two greedy, manipulative people who thought they could bully me into submission. I wouldn't let them win. With every painful step I took away from that house, my resolve grew stronger. They thought they had broken me, but they were wrong. They had just awakened a side of me I didn't even know existed. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person I knew I could trust in that moment, Mr. Grant, my parents' attorney. His voice was calm and steady, a lifeline in the storm. Lily, what happened? He asked, concern evident in his tone. I told him everything, the confrontation, the assault, how Jason and Martha had thrown me out of my own home. This is unacceptable, Mr. Grant said firmly. We'll take legal action immediately. They won't get away with this. For the first time that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. They might have tried to destroy me, but I wasn't going to let them succeed. The morning after that horrifying night, I woke up on a friend's couch, my body sore and my mind spinning. I could still hear their voices, Jason's cold, calculated tone and Martha's hateful demands, echoing in my head. But this time I didn't cry. I didn't feel helpless. All I felt was determination. If they thought they could take everything from me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I met with Mr. Grant the very next day. He was the attorney my parents had trusted for years, a man who knew the ins and outs of their estate better than anyone else. When I sat across from him in his office, my hands trembling slightly, I told him everything: how Jason and Martha had turned on me, how they had physically assaulted me, and how they had thrown me out of my own house. "They can't get away with this," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I need your help to stop them." Mr. Grant nodded, his expression serious. "Don't worry, Lily. We'll make sure they face the consequences for their actions. First, we'll file for a restraining order to keep them away from you and the estate. Then, we'll begin gathering evidence to build a solid case against them." I felt a flicker of hope. "What kind of evidence do we need?" I asked. "Everything you can provide," he replied. "Medical records documenting your injuries, messages or emails showing their manipulative behavior, and financial records proving their attempts to take over the estate. The more we have, the stronger our case will be." Over the next few days, I threw myself into the work. I went to the hospital to get my injuries documented: bruises on my arms, scratches on my hands, and the soreness in my back from being shoved onto the pavement. I scoured my phone for texts and emails from Jason and Martha, compiling every snide remark and demand they had ever made. With Mr. Grant's help, I also reviewed the financial accounts tied to the estate, looking for any irregularities that could prove their intent to seize control. It wasn't easy. Every piece of evidence I uncovered felt like a fresh wound, a reminder of how deeply they had betrayed me. But it also fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my parents, for the legacy they had worked so hard to leave behind. Then came the restraining order. Mr. Grant worked quickly, filing the necessary paperwork with the court. Within a week, a judge approved it, legally barring Jason and Martha from coming near me or the estate. It was a small victory, but it gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in weeks. Of course, they didn't take it well. Jason called me one evening, his voice dripping with false charm. "Lily, we don't have to do this. We're family. Let's just sit down and work this out." "Family?" I scoffed, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You and your mother beat me and threw me out of my own house. Do you really think I'll forgive you after that?" His tone turned cold. "You're making a mistake. You're going to regret this." "No, Jason," I said firmly. "The only mistake I made was trusting you." I hung up, my hands shaking, but my resolve stronger than ever. They weren't going to intimidate me. Not anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and strategy sessions. Mr. Grant and his team were meticulous, building a case that left no room for doubt. We collected testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed Jason and Martha's late-night visits to my house. We gathered financial records showing Jason's attempts to transfer funds from the estate to accounts in his name. And we prepared the medical evidence of my injuries, which painted a clear picture of their violent behavior. When the court date finally arrived, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. As I sat in the courtroom, watching Jason and Martha enter with their lawyer, I couldn't help but notice the smug expressions on their faces. They still thought they were going to win. But as the proceedings began, it became clear they had underestimated me. Mr. Grant presented our evidence piece by piece, each revelation chipping away at their facade. The texts and emails showed their manipulative tactics. The financial records proved their greed. And the medical reports left no doubt about the physical assault. Jason's lawyer tried to spin the story, painting me as unstable and uncooperative. But when I took the stand and recounted the events of that night, the way Jason shoved me, the way Martha grabbed and berated me, it was clear who the real villains were. As I spoke, I saw Jason's expression shift from smug to panicked. For the first time, he realized he was losing. Martha, meanwhile, glared at me with pure hatred, but even she couldn't deny the weight of the evidence against her. The trial lasted 3 days. On the final day, the judge delivered the verdict: guilty. Jason and Martha were sentenced to prison for their crimes, and the court ruled in my favor, affirming my sole ownership of the estate. As the bailiffs escorted them out of the courtroom, Martha shouted, "This isn't over, Lily. You'll regret this." But I didn't feel fear. I felt relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. The day Jason and Martha were sentenced felt like waking up from a nightmare. As I walked out of the courtroom, a weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying finally lifted. For the first time in months, I felt free, not just from their greed and manipulation, but from the fear they had planted in my heart. But freedom wasn't the end of the journey. I still had to rebuild my life, piece by piece, and take control of the legacy my parents left me. Their estate, their dreams, it was all still intact, but it needed care, direction, and a fresh start. And I was ready to give it everything I had. I started with the house, the same house Jason and Martha had tried to steal from me. It had always been my parents' pride and joy, a home filled with love and warmth. But after everything that had happened, it felt tainted, like a place haunted by betrayal. I knew I couldn't leave it that way. So I decided to transform it. I hired a team of contractors and designers, pouring myself into every detail of the renovation. The dark, heavy furniture was replaced with bright, airy pieces. The walls were painted in soft, calming colors that made the space feel open and welcoming. The living room, once a place of tension and conflict, became a vibrant, cozy area for entertaining. I turned the study, where so many confrontations had taken place, into a creative workspace filled with plants, light, and everything I needed to focus on my work as a financial consultant. Every change I made to the house felt like reclaiming a part of myself. It wasn't just a renovation, it was a rebirth. By the time the work was finished, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home. At the same time, I threw myself into managing my parents' estate. With the help of Mr. Grant and a team of trusted advisors, I reorganized the businesses my parents had left behind. I invested in new ventures that aligned with their values, focusing on sustainability and community impact. One of the properties I owned became a shelter for women who had faced abuse and homelessness, a cause that now felt deeply personal to me. As the estate grew, so did my confidence. For years, I had lived in the shadow of my parents' success, doubting whether I could ever live up to their legacy. But now I realized that their strength was in me. I wasn't just preserving their dreams, I was building my own. The hardest part of the journey, though, was facing the emotional scars left behind by Jason's betrayal. For 10 years, I had trusted him, loved him, and believed in him. Letting go of that pain wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I spent hours in therapy, working through the anger, the hurt, and the lingering doubts about myself. Slowly, I began to heal. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. Their support reminded me of the kind of love and loyalty I had been missing for so long. I even started mentoring young women in my field, sharing my experiences and helping them navigate challenges in their careers. Giving back became a source of healing and purpose for me. One evening, months after the trial, I stood on the balcony of my newly renovated home, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. This was the view my parents had loved so much, the view they had worked their whole lives to protect. And now it was mine. But this wasn't just about reclaiming what was taken from me. It was about learning who I truly was, someone stronger than I ever thought possible, someone who refused to be defined by betrayal or loss. Jason and Martha had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they only made me stronger. The journey wasn't easy, and the scars they left will always be a part of me. But those scars are also a testament to my resilience. They remind me of everything I've overcome, everything I've built, and everything I've yet to achieve. As I stood there, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, I thought of my parents. I hoped they could see me, standing in the home they built, carrying their dreams forward. They had given me the tools to survive, to fight, and to rebuild. And I knew, deep in my heart, that I had honored their legacy in the best way possible, by becoming the person they always believed I could be. At my sister's wedding, my mother humiliated me by ordering me to stand with the security guards, declaring I didn't deserve to be part of such a grand event. But when the groom arrived and saw me standing there, his reaction left everyone speechless. In a shocking twist, he canceled the wedding on the spot, demanded I get into the car with him, and sped off. However, just 30 minutes into the drive, an unthinkable revelation turned everything upside down. My name is Sophia Turner, and if you told me my sister's wedding day would change everything, I would have laughed in disbelief. But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? Let me take you back to the beginning of this whirlwind, when the invitation arrived. 3 days before the wedding, I found a cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. It was elegant, with my name written in gold calligraphy, but as soon as I opened it, the shock set in. The card didn't list a seat number or a time for the rehearsal dinner like most invitations. Instead, it had one simple instruction: report to the parking lot staff area upon arrival. I read it twice, my stomach sinking. My sister, Lila, had always been the golden child. Everything about her was perfect: her looks, her career, and now her fiancé, Nathan Wells, a tech tycoon who ran one of the biggest companies in the country. Compared to her, I was just me. I worked as a social worker in Seattle, helping struggling families and kids. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. Still, my parents never saw it that way. "Why can't you be more like Lila?" my mother, Margaret, would say, rolling her eyes at my thrift store outfits and my tiny apartment. "She's getting married to Nathan Wells, for heaven's sake. And look at you. What do you have to show for yourselves?" But I loved my work, even if they didn't. I loved seeing the kids I helped find homes, seeing their smiles when they realized someone cared about them. To me, that was more valuable than designer dresses or grand wedding venues. Still, I couldn't help feeling a sting when I saw that invitation. It wasn't an oversight. It was a message, a clear one. Lila didn't think I belonged among her elite crowd. And yet, against my better judgment, I decided to go. She was still my sister, and despite everything, I wanted to support her. The day of the wedding was bright and sunny, the kind of day that made you feel like everything should be perfect. I arrived at the venue, a sprawling mansion-turned-event space, just outside the city. I parked my old, slightly rusted car among the sea of luxury vehicles and made my way to the staff entrance, as instructed. A security guard stopped me, taking one look at my invitation before pointing to a side door. "Staff areas around the back," he said gruffly. I bit my lip, feeling a wave of embarrassment, but I nodded and walked through the narrow hallway that led to the kitchen. The venue staff was buzzing with activity, chefs shouting orders, waiters balancing trays of champagne. I felt completely out of place in my handmade dress, the one I had spent weeks sewing in the evenings after work. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant and crafted with care. Eventually, I was directed to my spot for the ceremony. It wasn't a seat, but rather a corner behind a pillar at the very back of the room. From there, I could see the lavish decorations, the flower arrangements that must have cost a fortune, the glittering chandeliers, the tables set with crystal and gold. Every detail screamed opulence, and every detail made me feel smaller. Then, just before the ceremony began, I spotted Lila. She looked stunning in her custom-made wedding gown, her makeup flawless, her hair styled into an intricate updo. She was glowing, but when her eyes flicked toward me, her smile tightened into something cold. "Glad you could make it," she said as she passed by, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Try not to embarrass me, okay?" I clenched my fists, but said nothing. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing how much her words stung. The ceremony began soon after, and despite everything, I couldn't deny that it was beautiful. The string quartet played softly as Lila walked down the aisle, arm in arm with our father. But my gaze wasn't on her for long. It was on Nathan, standing at the altar in his sharp suit. When his eyes met mine, something changed. He froze for a split second, his expression shifting from calm confidence to shock. Recognition? I couldn't quite place it, but it was enough to make my heart race. Nathan Wells wasn't just Lila's fiancé. He was Nick, the man I had loved 12 years ago. Back then, I was a 19-year-old college student, full of dreams about changing the world. Nick had been 23, a passionate coder who wanted to use technology to make a difference. We'd met at a community event, where I was protesting the demolition of a historic neighborhood to make way for new developments. Nick had supported me, not just in words but in action, brainstorming ways to help the community. We'd been inseparable for 6 months. We talked about everything, our dreams, our future, even the idea of starting something together. But then one day, he disappeared without a word. I called, I searched, but it was like he'd vanished into thin air. My mother had told me to forget about him, to focus on my studies, and eventually I did. But I never stopped wondering what had happened. And now, here he was, Nathan Wells, the man who had built a tech empire, standing at the altar with my sister. My heart pounded as I watched him. Did he recognize me? Did he remember what we had? And if he did, why hadn't he reached out? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing. This wedding was about to take a turn no one expected. The ceremony ended, and everyone moved toward the reception hall. I lingered in my corner, unsure if I wanted to face the crowd. Seeing Nathan, had thrown me completely off balance. My hands trembled as I adjusted my dress, trying to keep my emotions in check. Eventually, I stepped into the reception area.
It was just as extravagant as the ceremony.
Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. The tables were draped with silk, and servers walked around with trays of champagne flutes. I didn't belong here, and the few glances I caught from other guests confirmed it. I found my place, or rather, the spot Lila had designated for me. It was a small table tucked near the back, far from the head table where Lila, Nathan, and the rest of the wedding party sat. My table was practically hidden behind a large floral arrangement, and the place setting was noticeably different. While every other table had fine china and polished silverware, mine was set with plastic utensils and a handwritten note. Don't overstep. My chest tightened as I read the note. It was Lila's handwriting. She had gone out of her way to humiliate me. Still, I refused to let her win. I wouldn't cause a scene. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. As I sat there, I couldn't stop my eyes from drifting toward Nathan. He was seated beside Lila, but his focus wasn't on her. He was scanning the room, looking distracted. No, searching for something.
For me.
It wasn't long before our eyes met again. The moment stretched on, filled with unspoken questions and a wave of memories I wasn't ready to face. Then something unexpected happened. As Nathan raised his glass for a toast, his hand slipped and the wine glass shattered on the floor. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. But Nathan didn't notice the mess. His gaze was locked on me, his expression a mix of shock, regret, and something else I couldn't quite place. Lila leaned over, whispering something to him, but he barely responded. Later, during the dinner, Nathan approached me. My heart raced as he stood by my table, his presence towering over me. "Sophia," he said, his voice low and filled with emotion. "It really is you." I looked up at him, unsure whether to feel anger or relief. "It's me," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "And I see you've moved up in the world, Nick. Or should I call you Nathan now?" He winced at my words, pulling out the chair across from me and sitting down. "I didn't expect to see you here," he admitted. "When I saw your name on the guest list, I thought it had to be a mistake." I couldn't hold back the bitterness in my voice.
Why?
"Did you think I'd disappeared forever, just like you?" He flinched, running a hand through his hair. "Sophia, you don't understand. I didn't leave you by choice." I narrowed my eyes at him. "Oh, really? Because it sure felt like a choice when you vanished without a word."
I searched for you, Nick.
I called, I emailed, I even showed up at places I thought you might be. But you were gone. Like you never existed. Nathan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I didn't know what happened until recently. My father, he made sure we wouldn't be together." I froze, the weight of his words sinking in. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It's a long story, but the short version is that my father saw you as a threat. Back then, I didn't have the power I do now. I was just a young programmer with dreams, and he had control over everything. He found out about your activism, about the protests you were organizing, and decided you were bad for the company's image." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "So what? He told you to leave me, and you just did it." Nathan shook his head.
No.
He didn't tell me anything. He went to your mother? The air seemed to leave the room as his words sank in. My mother? What are you talking about? I asked, my voice shaking. Nathan looked pained. He paid your mother to make sure you stayed out of my life. A lot of money. Enough to convince her to send you away, to transfer you to another school, to tell me you wanted nothing to do with me. I felt like the ground was slipping out from under me. That can't be true. My mother wouldn't. But even as I said it, pieces of the past began to click into place. My mother's sudden insistence that I transfer schools. The strange influx of money that paid for Lila's lavish lifestyle and expensive college tuition. The way she always told me Nick wasn't worth my time. I clenched my fists, rage bubbling beneath the surface. You're telling me my own mother sold me out? Nathan nodded. I didn't know until recently. I found the paperwork, payments made from my father's account to your mother. When I confronted him, he admitted it. He said he was protecting me and the company. I shook my head, disbelief and fury warring within me. And you never tried to find me? You just believed him. Nathan's eyes softened. I thought you didn't want me, Sophia. He showed me messages, fake ones. I thought you'd moved on. I wanted to scream, to cry, but instead, I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need answers, Nick. And I'm going to get them, starting with my mother. As I turned to leave, I could feel Nathan's eyes on me, but I didn't stop. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about betrayal from the people who were supposed to love me the most. And I wasn't going to rest until I uncovered the whole truth. I left the reception hall in a haze, my heart pounding and my head spinning. Nathan's revelations had cracked something wide open inside me. My own mother had taken money to erase me from his life. The pieces fit too perfectly for me to deny it any longer, but I still needed to hear it from her. I needed to hear her admit it. I found her near the bar, chatting with a group of well-dressed women, her laughter ringing out like she didn't have a care in the world. My stomach turned. How could she be so carefree after what she'd done? Mom, I called, my voice firm. The women turned to look at me, their eyes scanning me like I didn't belong, but I didn't care. My mother's smile faltered when she saw the look on my face. Sophia, she said with a nervous laugh, stepping toward me. What are you doing? You're causing a scene. Oh, I'm causing a scene? I snapped, my voice rising. Is that what you said when you took money to make sure I disappeared from Nick's life? Her face went pale, and I knew I had hit the mark. The women around us exchanged awkward glances and slowly backed away, sensing this was not a conversation for an audience. Let's talk somewhere private, she said through gritted teeth, grabbing my arm and steering me toward a quieter corner of the room. When we were alone, I yanked my arm free and stared at her. Tell me the truth, Mom. Did you take money from Victor Wells to get rid of me? She sighed, smoothing the fabric of her dress, as if that could somehow shield her from what was coming. Sophia, you don't understand. Don't, I interrupted. Don't tell me I don't understand. Just tell me the truth. Her eyes darted around, as if looking for an escape, but there wasn't one. Fine, she said finally, her voice sharp. Yes, I took the money. But it was for your own good. For my own goods? I repeated, my voice cracking. How is destroying my relationship for my own good? She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. Nick, Nathan, wasn't someone you could build a future with. He came from a world you didn't belong to, Sophia. And his father made it clear that if you stayed in his life, it would ruin both of you. I did what I had to do to protect you. I stared at her, disbelief flooding every part of me. Protect me? You didn't protect me. You sold me out. You set me away and let me think he abandoned me. I gave you a better chance at life, she snapped. You went to a better school, got your degree, and now you have a job that suits you. And Lila, she was destined for this kind of life. The money helped her get where she needed to be. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So it was all about Lila? About making sure she got everything while I was shoved aside. Her silence spoke louder than words. My chest tightened with anger, but also with a deep, aching sadness. I trusted you, I said quietly. You were supposed to look out for me, not sell me off to the highest bidder. I turned and walked away before she could say another word. I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. My hands were trembling as I made my way back to the reception hall, my mind racing. I couldn't stay quiet about this. The truth needed to come out. When I entered the hall, the party was in full swing. Guests were laughing, dancing, and clinking glasses. Lila was at the center of it all, her arm looped through Nathan's, her smile as dazzling as ever. But Nathan's eyes weren't on her. They were on me. I walked straight to the head table, ignoring the stares and whispers as I approached. Lila's smile faltered when she saw me. "Sophia," she said, her voice tight. "What are you doing?" "I need to say something," I said, loud enough for everyone around us to hear. Her eyes narrowed. "This is my wedding. Don't ruin it." "Your wedding was already ruined the moment you built it on lies," I shot back. The room fell silent, the music cutting off as everyone turned to watch. I glanced at Nathan, who nodded subtly, encouraging me to continue. "I know the truth," I said, looking directly at my mother, who had re-entered the room and was now frozen near the door. "I know about the money. I know about how you made sure I was out of Nathan's life. All to protect a business deal." Gasps rippled through the room, but I wasn't finished. I turned to Lila.
"And you? Did you know?"
"Did you know that our mother sold me out so you could have your perfect little life?" Lila's face turned red, and she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Nathan stood then, his voice calm but firm. "She didn't know," he said, addressing the crowd. "But now everyone knows the truth. This wedding is off." Lila let out a strangled cry as the room erupted into chaos. I stood there, feeling both vindicated and utterly drained. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The room was chaos after Nathan's announcement. Guests whispered in shock. Others pulled out their phones to capture the drama, and Lila was frozen, her face a mask of humiliation. My mother, standing near the door, looked like she wanted to disappear. I stood there, feeling the weight of every word I'd just spoken, every truth that had been revealed. Nathan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "I won't go through with this wedding," he said firmly. "I won't live a lie to satisfy someone else's ambitions. This isn't the life I want." Lila spun toward him, her eyes blazing. "You can't be serious. After everything I've done, everything we've built together, you're going to throw it all away for hers." She pointed at me, her words dripping with disdain. Nathan met her gaze calmly. "What exactly have we built, Lila? A relationship orchestrated by our families? A merger disguised as love?" He shook his head.
"No."
"I'm done being controlled. This is over." Lila's scream echoed through the room, and she lunged for her bouquet, hurling it in our direction. It missed, landing on a champagne tower and sending glasses crashing to the floor. Gasps filled the room as shards of crystal scattered everywhere, but I couldn't help feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Lila's perfect day was crumbling, just like the lies that had held it together. Nathan turned to me, his voice softer now. "Sophia, can we talk?" "Somewhere quieter." I hesitated, but finally nodded. "Okay." We stepped outside onto the terrace, the cool evening air a sharp contrast to the heat and tension inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The stars above Seattle twinkled, serene and indifferent to the storm we'd just unleashed. Nathan broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "For everything. For not finding you sooner. For believing the lies my father told me. I should have fought harder for us." I looked at him, searching his face for sincerity. "Why didn't you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why didn't you come back?" He ran a hand through his hair, his expression pained. "I thought you didn't want me, Sophia. My father showed me messages, fake ones, I realize now. He said you'd moved on, that you were with someone else. I believed him, because I thought I wasn't good enough for you." I let his words sink in, the years of misunderstanding and pain weighing on both of us. "And now?" I asked quietly. "What do you want now, Nathan?" He took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "I want to make things right. I want to build something real, not just with you, but for the people who've been hurt by the kind of greed and manipulation my father stood for. I've taken control of the company. Sophia. As of last week, I'm the majority shareholder. I blinked in surprise. You mean? He nodded.
Yes.
My father signed over his shares as an early wedding gift. Ironic, isn't it? He thought he was securing his legacy, but I plan to take the company in a completely different direction. His words sent a spark of hope through me, but I couldn't ignore the past so easily. And what about us? I asked. Do you expect me to just forget everything that's happened? Nathan stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. No, I don't expect that. But I'm asking for a chance to prove to you that I've changed. That I'm not the man who let you down all those years ago. I hesitated, my heart battling my head. Part of me wanted to walk away, to protect myself from being hurt again. But another part of me, the part that had never stopped loving him, wanted to believe he was telling the truth. Okay, I said finally, but it's going to take time. A lot of time. His face broke into a small, hopeful smile. I can wait. We returned to the reception hall together, where the chaos had started to settle. Lila and my mother were nowhere to be seen, likely too embarrassed to face the fallout. Guests whispered as we walked in, but I didn't care anymore.
For the first time in years, I felt free.
Nathan took the microphone and addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice steady, tonight has taken an unexpected turn, but it's also the beginning of something new. As my first act as CEO of Wells Tech, I'm proud to announce the launch of the Turner Wells Foundation, a program dedicated to supporting underserved communities and creating opportunities for those who need it most. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by scattered applause. Nathan turned to me, his eyes soft. And I couldn't think of anyone better to lead it than Sophia Turner. Tears filled my eyes as I realized the enormity of what he was offering. Not just the job, but a chance to turn all the pain into something meaningful. I nodded, unable to speak, and the applause grew louder. In the weeks that followed, the foundation became a reality. We funded programs for education, housing, and community development, finally living up to the ideals we'd once dreamed of together. Lila married someone else, a minor celebrity who loved the spotlight as much as she did, and my mother, ostracized from our lives, eventually moved away. As for me and Nathan, we took things slow, rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. On quiet evenings, we'd sit on the terrace, talking about the future. And one day, when he slipped a simple gold band onto my finger, I knew I had finally come home. Sometimes, justice isn't about revenge, it's about rebuilding. And for us, that was the greatest triumph of all. At the family reunion, my unfaithful husband arrived with his new mistress and brazenly announced her as his future wife. He shouted at me, vowing to take over my restaurant, divorce me, and leave me with nothing. The room was stunned into silence, but I couldn't stop laughing. Little did they know, the two of them had just walked straight into my carefully laid trap, and by the time I was done, their entire world would come crashing down. My name is Elena, and this is the story of how my world fell apart, only for me to rebuild it stronger than ever. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to find herself betrayed, but life is a way of teaching lessons in the most painful ways. Let me start at the beginning, the day everything began to unravel. I was 35, running a chain of luxury restaurants in Miami. Business was good, and I had built a life I was proud of. My husband, Ryan, was a business consultant. Or at least, that's what I thought. We had been married for 8 years, and while our marriage wasn't perfect, I believed we were happy. He traveled a lot for work, always busy with meetings and conferences, but I chalked it up to his ambition. I admired him for it, or maybe I just convinced myself to. Things began to feel off. Ryan started acting strange, overly interested in my family affairs, which was unusual. He had always avoided family events, calling them a waste of time. So when he insisted on hosting the annual family gathering at our estate, I was surprised. I even joked about it with my younger sister, Mila, who had always been my closest confidant. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Elena, Since when does Ryan care about family reunions? Something's up. I shrugged it off, trying to ignore the unease bubbling inside me. Maybe he was just trying to be more involved, I told myself. That was until I noticed other changes. Ryan started making calls late at night, whispering in the study with the door locked. He claimed it was work, but the way he quickly shut his laptop when I entered the room told me otherwise. The day of the family gathering arrived, and Ryan was a whirlwind of activity, coordinating the catering, picking the decor, and even fussing over the seating arrangements. I tried to push my doubts aside as my family arrived. My parents, Victor and Carla, showed up early, bringing their usual warmth and energy. My dad had always been a hard man to impress, but my mom was the glue that held us all together. My cousin Vanessa arrived next, looking as polished as ever in a designer dress that felt a little too flashy for a family lunch. As everyone settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ryan was overly attentive to Vanessa, stealing glances at her when he thought no one was looking. Mila noticed too. She leaned in and whispered, "What's with him? He's acting like he's hosting a red carpet event." I forced a laugh, but my stomach churned. Then it happened. Midway through lunch, as my father was giving one of his classic speeches about family values, Ryan stood up and clinked his glass. The room fell silent. I thought he was going to thank everyone for coming, but his next words knocked the air out of me. "I have an announcement to make," he said, smiling that smug smile I had grown to hate. "Vanessa and I are in love." The room froze. My family's shocked faces mirrored my own. Vanessa reached for his hand across the table, her expression a mix of triumph and nerves. Ryan continued, as if rehearsed, "Elena and I will be divorcing. Vanessa and I want to start a new chapter together." I couldn't speak. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, while my father's face turned crimson with fury. Mila, sitting beside me, whispered, "Oh my God, Elena, say something." But I didn't. I just stared at Ryan, the man I had shared my life with, as he destroyed it in front of everyone. Then something clicked inside me. This wasn't shock. This wasn't new information. I had known for months, deep down, that something was happening. And while my world felt like it was falling apart, I realized I had been preparing for this moment. I stood up slowly, setting down my wine glass. "Is that all, Ryan?" I asked, my voice calm, steady. His smirk faltered. He had been expecting tears, screams, a meltdown. What he didn't know was that I wasn't the same woman he thought I was. "Elena," he began, his tone condescending, "I know this must be shocking." "Not really," I interrupted. "Though I am curious, Vanessa, did he promise you a share of the restaurants? Because that's going to be complicated." The color drained from Ryan's face. Vanessa's hand tightened around his.
"What are you talking about?" she demanded.
I smiled. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough. But please, don't let me stop you from celebrating your big announcement." I turned to my stunned family. "I apologize for this unexpected entertainment. Please enjoy the food. I need some air." I walked out onto the patio, where the cool Miami breeze hit my face. Mila followed me, wrapping her arm around my shoulders.
"You knew," she said.
It wasn't a question. For months, I admitted. And I've been preparing. For what? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was Patrick, my lawyer. I opened the message. "All documents are ready. Operation Karma is a go." I showed Mila the message. Her eyes widened. "Elena," she breathed. "What have you done?" "Everything," I said, my voice steady. "I've done everything to make sure Ryan doesn't just lose me. He loses everything he tried to take from me." Behind us, the voices from the dining room rose as the chaos unfolded. But for the first time in months, I felt calm. Ryan thought he had blindsided me. He had no idea he had just walked into the first step of his own downfall. This was just the beginning. When I walked out onto the patio that day, I knew there was no turning back. Everything Ryan had done, everything he had planned, it was about to come crashing down. But let me tell you, it didn't happen overnight. The truth was, I'd spent months preparing for this. I just never thought the moment would feel so surreal. After Mila read Patrick's message, She asked me again, "What have you done, Elena?" "I've made sure that Ryan doesn't get away with this," I said, staring out at the Miami skyline. "And that starts today." Mila leaned against the railing, trying to piece it all together. "What do you mean? What did Patrick mean by Operation Karma?" I turned to face her. "I've known about Ryan's affair for 6 months. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I thought I was imagining things, that maybe I was being paranoid. But then I started noticing the late-night phone calls, the sudden business trips that didn't add up, the way he was always whispering to someone when he thought I wasn't around." Mila frowned. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed proof," I said. "If I had confronted him without it, he would have denied everything and twisted it around. So I started paying attention. I checked his laptop one night when he was asleep and saw emails between him and Vanessa. They were planning everything, the divorce, the takeover of the restaurants, even how they were going to manipulate the board into pushing me out." Mila's jaw dropped.
What?
How could he be so arrogant? "Because he thought I wasn't paying attention," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "He underestimated me, and that was his first mistake." Over the next few weeks, I worked quietly but methodically. I hired Patrick, a lawyer I had met through a mutual friend, and explained everything to him. He advised me to act cautiously. Together, we came up with a plan to protect what was mine. The first step was ensuring Ryan couldn't touch the business. Patrick helped me draft documents that transferred controlling interest of the restaurant chain to me. The brilliance of it? Ryan signed them himself, thinking they were routine paperwork for the business. He never read a single page. Ironic, isn't it? His own arrogance blinded him. But the real game changer came when Mila, who's an investigative journalist, decided to help me dig deeper. I told her about Ryan's emails, and she suggested we look into his business dealings. Mila had a knack for uncovering secrets, and within weeks, we discovered that Ryan wasn't just planning to betray me, he was running an illegal import-export operation. Smuggling high-value goods under the radar, laundering money through shell companies, the works. "I still can't believe he was stupid enough to think he'd get away with all of this," Mila said as we worked late one night in my home office. "People like Ryan always think they're untouchable," I said. "He's been lying for so long that he's convinced himself no one will ever catch him." Mila tapped her laptop screen. "Well, he's about to get a reality check. Look at this. Offshore accounts. Fake invoices. And here, he's been paying someone named Jacob." The name made me freeze. "Jacob? As in Vanessa's ex-husband." "Looks like it," Mila said. "Ryan's been wiring him money for months. Big amounts. My guess? Jacob is part of this operation, too." And just like that, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. Vanessa wasn't just Ryan's mistress. She was also being used by Jacob. He had probably manipulated her into working with Ryan, promising her a piece of the pie. It was almost sad, almost. By the time the family gathering rolled around, I was ready. I knew Ryan would try to make his announcement there, thinking he'd humiliate me and come out on top. What he didn't know was that I had already taken everything he thought he was stealing. After the chaos of that day, I spent the next few hours on the phone with Patrick, finalizing the next steps. Mila stayed by my side, her journalist instincts kicking in as she started digging even deeper. The more we uncovered, the more obvious it became that Ryan's entire plan was falling apart, and he didn't even know it yet. But I wasn't finished. I needed more leverage, something that would force Ryan to cooperate when the time came. That's when Mila found the real smoking gun, records of Ryan's illegal shipments. If I handed those over to the authorities, it wouldn't just ruin his business. It would send him to prison. "Do you really want to go that far?" Mila asked me one night. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of what I was doing. "Mila, he betrayed me. He tried to take everything I've worked for."
He thought I was too weak to fight back.
"This isn't just about revenge. It's about justice. He needs to face the consequences of his actions." Mila nodded.
Okay.
"Then let's make sure we get it right." The final piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly. Vanessa showed up at my office one evening, looking nervous and desperate. "Elena, I need to talk to you," she said. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Why would I want to hear anything you have to say? Because I know what Ryan and Jacob have been planning, she said. And I want out. Her confession caught me off guard, but I didn't trust her, not yet. Why now, Vanessa? Why should I believe you? Because Jacob's been threatening me, she said, her voice shaking. He used me to get to Ryan, and now he's using Ryan to cover his tracks. I didn't know it would go this far. I stared at her for a long moment. Maybe she was telling the truth, or maybe she was just trying to save herself. Either way, I realized she might be the key to bringing both Ryan and Jacob down. Fine, I said finally. If you're serious about helping me, then tell me everything. And she did. By the time she left, I had all the information I needed to finish what I'd started. Ryan thought he was in control. Jacob thought he was untouchable. But they were about to learn the hard way that karma never misses its mark. When Vanessa left my office that evening, I sat there for a while, letting her words sink in. I didn't trust her completely, but the details she shared lined up with what Mila and I had already uncovered. Ryan and Jacob's partnership wasn't just about stealing from me, it was part of a much larger, more dangerous operation. Smuggling, laundering, fraud, they had their hands in everything. Vanessa had been their pawn, and now that the walls were closing in, she wanted out. I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for her. But not too much. The next step was setting the trap. Patrick and Mila helped me map out every detail. The key was timing. I needed to make Ryan feel like he still had the upper hand, even as his entire world was crumbling beneath him. And for that, I needed a confrontation on my terms. 2 days later, I sent Ryan a message. Meet me at Cafe Lirio tomorrow at 3 p.m. Alone. We need to talk. Cafe Lirio was where we'd had our first date, back when I thought Ryan was charming and ambitious, not the liar and manipulator I now knew him to be. I chose it deliberately, knowing it would throw him off balance. People like Ryan thrive on control, and the last thing he'd expect was for me to take it back. The next day, I arrived early, taking a seat near the back where I could see both the entrance and the exit. Mila and Patrick were nearby, just in case, but this was my battle to fight. Ryan walked in right on time, wearing his usual power suit and that same smug expression. He spotted me and sauntered over like he owned the place. It was almost laughable. Elena, he said, sitting across from me. To what do I owe the pleasure? I stared at him, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. You're going to sign the divorce papers, I said finally. And you're going to walk away with nothing. He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Is that so? Last I checked, half of everything is mine, including those restaurants you're so proud of. I slid an envelope across the table. Open it. Ryan frowned, but did as I asked. Inside were copies of the documents he had signed months ago, transferring controlling interest of the restaurant chain to me. His face darkened as he flipped through the pages, realization dawning. This is a joke, he said, his voice shaking.
No, Ryan.
That's your signature on every page. You signed away your share of the business without even reading the fine print. You were too busy scheming with Vanessa to notice. He slammed the envelope onto the table, his composure cracking. You think this is going to stop me? I'll fight you in court. I'll drag this out for years. Good luck with that, I said calmly. But you might want to read what's in the second envelope first. I slid another envelope across the table. This one contained proof of his illegal activities, smuggling records, offshore accounts, payments to Jacob. Mila and I had worked tirelessly to compile everything, and it was damning. Ryan's face turned pale as he flipped through the evidence. Where did you get this?
I have my sources, I said.
And if you don't sign the papers and walk away quietly, I'll hand all of this over to the authorities. You'll lose more than the restaurants, Ryan. You'll lose everything. He tried to regain his composure, but I could see the panic in his eyes. You don't have the guts. Try me, I said, leaning forward. And before you think about running to Jacob for help, you should know that Vanessa has already confessed everything. She's cooperating with me now. Jacob's days are numbered, and so are yours. Ryan's hands clenched into fists. Vanessa, that ungrateful. Careful, I interrupted. You wouldn't want to say something you'll regret." He glared at me, his arrogance replaced by desperation. For the first time, he realized he wasn't in control. I was. The next day, Patrick filed the signed divorce papers, officially severing my ties to Ryan. But the battle wasn't over yet. As expected, Ryan tried to retaliate. He made a last-ditch effort to dig up dirt on my father, Victor, hoping to use it against me. What he didn't realize was that I had already spoken to my father about his past. Yes, there had been questionable deals decades ago, but nothing that could hurt him now. Ryan's threats were empty, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Mila uncovered even more about Jacob's operations. He had been using Ryan to funnel money through his illegal trading network, promising him a cut of the profits. But when Vanessa turned on him, Jacob panicked. He started moving his funds to offshore accounts, trying to cover his tracks. That was when Patrick and I made our move. We provided the authorities with everything we had on Jacob and Ryan. The smuggling routes, the fake invoices, the money laundering, it was all there. Within days, Jacob was on the run and Ryan was under investigation. It was only a matter of time before they both faced the consequences of their actions. The morning after the divorce was finalized, I sat in my office, staring at the stack of documents Patrick had brought me. The restaurant chain was mine, officially and legally. But this wasn't just about the business. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my power. Vanessa called me later that day. "Elena, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me a chance to fix things." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "You still have a lot to prove. But if you're serious about turning your life around, I'll give you that chance." She promised she wouldn't let me down. Only time would tell if she meant it. As for Ryan, I didn't hear from him directly after that. He was too busy trying to save himself. But deep down, I knew it was over for him. Karma was already catching up. And I wasn't done yet. There was one more move to make, and it would be the final nail in the coffin. The morning I saw the news headline, I knew it was over for Ryan and Jacob. The authorities had raided Jacob's safe house in New Orleans and arrested him on charges of money laundering, smuggling, and tax evasion. As for Ryan, he was taken into custody shortly after, caught in his office trying to shred documents when investigators showed up with a warrant. It was surreal, watching it all play out. For months, I had been working toward this moment, preparing every detail, every move. Now, as I sat in my office sipping my coffee, I felt a strange sense of calm. Karma had finally done its work. Later that day, Patrick came by with updates. "Jacob's operation is unraveling," he said, placing a thick file on my desk. The evidence we handed over gave the authorities everything they needed. Ryan and Jacob are both looking at long prison sentences. "And the restaurants?" I asked. "They're safe," Patrick assured me. "Ryan forfeited any claims when he signed the divorce papers. The board is fully behind you. Your leadership has stabilized the company." Hearing those words felt like a victory, but there was still one loose end to tie up. Vanessa. She had been complicit in the beginning, but she had also played a crucial role in exposing Jacob's plans. I decided to give her the second chance she had asked for. I invited her to my new cafe, a small, beautiful space I had purchased in downtown Miami. It was a symbolic gesture, a reminder of where my journey had started and how far I had come. Vanessa arrived, looking more like her old self, simple, understated, no flashy designer clothes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said nervously. "I didn't do this for you, Vanessa," I said, motioning for her to sit. "I did it because I believe in redemption. But I need to know you're serious about turning your life around." "I am," she said, her voice firm. "I've cut ties with Jacob. I want to build something real, something honest." I slid a folder across the table. "This is a management contract for the cafe. If you're serious, you'll take this job and prove to me that you're more than the mistakes you've made." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Thank you, Elena. I won't let you down." A week later, I attended the board meeting as the official CEO of the restaurant chain. It felt incredible to sit at the head of the table, a position I had earned not just through strategy, but through resilience. My father, Victor, even came by to congratulate me. "I underestimated you, Elena," he said, pride shining in his eyes. "You've shown more strength than I ever thought possible." Months passed, and life finally began to feel normal again. Ryan's trial ended with a guilty verdict, and he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Jacob faced even harsher penalties. As for me, I focused on expanding the business and launching a mentorship program for women in leadership, a way to help others avoid the kind of betrayal I had endured. Standing in my cafe one afternoon, watching customers enjoy their coffee and pastries, I reflected on everything that had happened. My story wasn't just about revenge or bringing people down. It was about rebuilding myself, proving that no matter how much someone tries to tear you down, you can always rise again. Karma might have done its part, but I had done mine too. And that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all. After a life-changing accident left me in a wheelchair, my greedy husband abandoned me. At my father-in-law's funeral, he threw divorce papers in my face and cruelly shouted, "I don't need a disabled wife." He laughed, claiming, "Now I own the $250 million company," and kicked me out. But what he didn't know was that my secret revenge was already set, and the very next day, he found himself behind bars. My name is Sophia Evans, and this is my story. A story of betrayal, survival, and the strength to rise again. It all started in New York City, a place where dreams are made, but also where lives can be torn apart in an instant. I've always been the kind of person who believed in hard work and dedication. I wasn't born into wealth, but I married into it. My husband, Mark, was the son of Richard Evans, a powerful businessman who owned a $250 million empire. Mark had everything handed to him on a silver platter: money, status, and a family legacy. But it was all too much for him. Mark didn't care about the company, didn't care about building anything for himself. He lived a life of leisure, relying on his father's money. The only thing he seemed interested in was wasting the life his father had worked so hard to build. I was different. I worked hard for everything I achieved. When I married Mark, I was already a senior executive at my father-in-law's company. I worked my way up, proving my worth every day. I was passionate about the business. I wanted to make a name for myself, but also, I wanted to make Richard proud. He always had high hopes for me, seeing the potential in me that Mark lacked. I didn't mind it. I didn't need to be treated like royalty. I wanted to earn everything on my own. But Mark, he did nothing. He would often spend his time at bars or lounging around the house, spending his father's money as if it grew on trees. At first, I thought he'd grow up, mature, and take on some responsibility. But as the years passed, I realized that wasn't going to happen. It was like living with a man-child. And yet, I stayed. For the sake of our marriage, I told myself I could make things work. But I couldn't change him. And deep down, I knew I was alone. Then, everything changed. My life, my whole world, turned upside down in an instant. One rainy evening, I was driving home from a meeting when the accident happened. The details still feel like a blur. One moment, I was on the road, and the next, my car was flipped over, crushed against the barrier. The pain was immediate. I could feel my legs, but I couldn't move them. Panic flooded my mind. I knew something was horribly wrong. I was rushed to the hospital. The doctors told me the worst news. My legs were severely injured, and I would be unable to walk for a long time, possibly forever. It felt like my life had been stolen from me in that one moment. The thought of never walking again haunted me. But the hardest part wasn't the injury itself. It was the people around me. My husband, Mark, who should have been my rock, barely came to visit. His indifference stung like 1,000 needles. He'd come to the hospital, sit there for a while, then leave, saying he had more important things to do. He was only concerned about his own comfort. Not once did he ask how I was doing or express any real empathy for what I was going through. But there was one person who showed me kindness: my father-in-law, Richard. Richard Evans, the man who had built everything with his own hands. Despite his tough exterior, he had a heart that cared. He made sure I had the best doctors, the best rehabilitation experts. He visited me often, even after long days at work, and made sure I knew he was there for me. I appreciated that more than I could ever put into words. For a moment, It felt like he was the only one who saw me, not as a burden, but as a person in need of support. While I was struggling to come to terms with my new reality, Richard took the time to talk to me, encouraging me not to lose hope. "You're strong, Sophia," he'd say. "I know you'll get through this." And for the first time in a long time, I believed someone had faith in me. However, life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. I had barely begun to adjust to my wheelchair when the phone call came. Richard had suffered a heart attack. It was sudden, and before I knew it, he was gone. The funeral was a blur of faces, tears, and whispered condolences. But something happened during that time that would change everything. Richard, before his death, had made a decision that no one knew about, not even Mark. He had transferred everything, the company, the properties, the money, into my name. Richard knew Mark would squander the family legacy. He knew that Mark was incapable of handling the responsibility. So, with a clear mind, Richard entrusted me with everything. He left it all to me. At the time, I didn't know any of this. I was still recovering, still processing the loss of the man who had been more of a father to me than my own had ever been. But the moment I found out about Richard's decision was the moment my life took another turn, one I wasn't prepared for. After the funeral, Mark's behavior changed drastically. His indifference turned into something darker. One afternoon, while I was still trying to heal, he came to me. With a cold expression, he threw a set of divorce papers in front of me. His words hit me like a slap in the face. "I don't need you anymore," he said, his voice emotionless. "Now that I own everything, now that I control the $250 million company, you're just a burden to me. I don't want a disabled wife. Leave." The shock was overwhelming. I sat there, unable to comprehend what he had just said. His words were cruel, heartless, and the weight of them crushed me. I couldn't understand how he could say that to me, how he could just throw away everything we had built together. And just like that, he ordered me out of the house. I was devastated, but I was also angry. This wasn't the man I had married. This was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. I didn't know what to do. I was lost, both emotionally and physically. But deep down, something in me began to shift. I had to fight back. I couldn't let him destroy me. I contacted a lawyer. I had no idea what my rights were, and I certainly didn't know the full extent of what Richard had done. But soon, I would find out just how much my father-in-law had truly believed in me. I was in the process of finding out just how deep the betrayal ran when something inside me began to change. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not anymore. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. It took me a while to pull myself together after Mark's betrayal. At first, I couldn't even wrap my mind around what he had said. How could he just throw everything away? Our marriage, my recovery, the love and support I had given him? It all meant nothing to him. He was more concerned with what he could get from his father's wealth than with being a decent human being. I spent the first few days in a fog of disbelief, replaying his cruel words in my mind. It hurt more than the accident itself, the way he had discarded me like I was nothing. But deep down, I knew I couldn't let him win. I had to find out more about what had happened. I had to understand my rights, what my father-in-law, Richard, had left behind. I couldn't just walk away and let him take everything without a fight. That's when I reached out to a lawyer. I knew the situation was complex, and I needed someone to help me navigate it. The lawyer I contacted was efficient, calm, and direct. He listened to me, took down my details, and assured me that he would look into everything, from the property to the company shares. I could sense that he was just as shocked by what I told him as I was. But as he dug deeper, I soon learned the truth, something I hadn't expected, something that would change everything. The truth was, Richard had left everything to me. Every last share of the company, every building, every property. Everything had been transferred into my name before his death. It was his final decision, one made out of trust and necessity. He had seen through Mark's immaturity, his irresponsible ways, and had decided to pass the family legacy onto me instead. Richard knew that Mark wouldn't be able to manage the company, let alone keep the wealth intact. He had made sure that I, not Mark, would be the one to carry the torch. I couldn't believe it. I felt a strange mix of emotions, shock, relief, and anger. On one hand, I was grateful for the trust Richard had placed in me, especially after all the years of hard work I'd put into the company. But on the other hand, I was furious. I had been married to Mark for years, and here I was, inheriting the entire empire that should have been his by birthright. The thought of Mark, selfish, lazy Mark, thinking the company was his to inherit, only to realize now that it wasn't, it felt like a cruel twist of fate. I spent a few days in contemplation, letting this revelation sink in. I thought about how I would confront Mark, how I would make him understand that I was no longer the weak, dependent woman he thought I was. I was a survivor. I had been through so much already, and I wasn't going to let him take everything from me. I was the rightful owner now, and I would take what was mine. It wasn't long before my recovery began to speed up. After weeks of hard work, physical therapy, and sheer determination, I was able to walk again. Slowly at first, shaky and uncertain, but each step was a victory. With each step, I felt stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. I had been through so much, and now I had my legs back. I wasn't the same person who had been wheeled around in that hospital bed. I wasn't the same person who had been left behind by a husband who couldn't even be bothered to care. And that's when it hit me. I was going to take control. I was going to walk into that office, into that company, and claim what was rightfully mine. The thought of Mark, sitting there pretending he was in charge, made me sick. He had no idea what was coming. I called my lawyer, and together, we made a plan. It was time for me to make my move. I wasn't going to sit back and let Mark think he could keep everything. I wasn't going to let him get away with what he'd done to me. I was going to confront him, and I was going to take what he thought was his. The day I finally walked into that office, I felt a surge of power. I had been patient, but now I was ready. I pushed through the doors of the company headquarters, heading straight to the CEO's office. And there he was, Mark, sitting at the desk like he owned the place. When he saw me walk in, I could see the shock in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to recover so quickly, and certainly hadn't expected me to be walking into that office, confident and strong. For a moment, his face froze, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. But he quickly masked it with a sneer, acting as if he hadn't just thrown me out of our home days before. Back again? Mark sneered. What are you doing here, Sophia? Come to beg? You know this is my company now. You're nothing more than a disabled wife with no place here. I held my ground.
No, Mark.
This company is mine. I own it now. He laughed, a bitter, condescending laugh. You think I'm going to believe that? You're delusional. You don't own anything. Now get out of here. You're wasting my time. I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal documents my lawyer had helped me gather. I have the paperwork. Everything Richard left, it's all mine. Not yours. Mark's face paled as he scanned the papers. This is fake, he spat. You're lying. His tone shifted from arrogant to defensive as he quickly pressed the intercom button, calling for security. Get them out of here.
Now.
But I wasn't leaving. Not this time. My lawyer, who had been standing behind me, was already on the phone with the police. Within minutes, the atmosphere in the office turned tense as security came to escort us out. But before they could lay a hand on us, the police arrived. I stood firm, telling them, Mark Evans is trespassing. He's trying to steal what doesn't belong to him. The officers turned toward Mark. He looked like a man caught in a lie, struggling to maintain his composure. He tried to protest, but it was too late. His world was crumbling around him. As the police moved him out of the office, I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The moment I saw Mark being escorted out of that office by the police, I felt a rush of victory, but it wasn't complete. I could see the panic in his eyes, the way his composure was slipping. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered everything he'd done to me, everything he'd taken from me when I needed him the most. I wasn't about to back down now. I wasn't just reclaiming my position in the company. I was reclaiming my dignity. Mark tried to make excuses, his voice shaking with anger and desperation. This is a setup. You're all making a huge mistake, he yelled, but his words only grew weaker as the police led him down the hallway, his face reddening with frustration. I stood tall, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't felt in so long. I had fought back, and I had won. The company that Richard had built and entrusted to me was now mine to lead. No longer would I be the woman stuck in a wheelchair, reliant on the kindness of others. No longer would I be the woman who was invisible to the one person who should have cared for her. I was the CEO now, and nothing was going to take that away from me. Once Mark was gone, I turned to my lawyer and nodded. It was time to take the final steps. I had reclaimed my place in the company, but the journey was far from over. I couldn't let Mark think he could get away with what he'd done. The betrayal, the cruelty, the way he had discarded me like I was nothing, it all needed to be addressed. But as I stood there, savoring the moment, I knew one thing for sure. I had made the right choice. I wasn't going to let Mark's greed and selfishness define my life any longer. He had pushed me to the edge, and now I was in control. Later that afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer. Apparently, Mark wasn't going down without a fight. He had already been calling our old family friends, trying to convince them that I had forged the documents, that the whole thing was a lie. He thought he could manipulate the situation the way he always had. But this time, it wasn't going to work. This time, he had underestimated me. I didn't hesitate for a second. I instructed my lawyer to press charges for harassment and fraud. I was done with Mark and his lies. If he thought he could just walk away from the mess he created, he had another thing coming. The next morning, as I arrived at the company, I could feel the eyes of the staff on me. Word had already spread about Mark's outburst, and I could sense the tension in the air. But as I walked through the hallways, I noticed something else. People were looking at me differently. There was respect in their eyes now, where there had been none before. Richard had always told me I had the potential to lead. Now I was showing them I could. As I sat in Richard's old office, now my office, I finally allowed myself a moment of peace. It had been a long, painful journey to get here. The accident, the betrayal, the months of uncertainty, it had all brought me to this point. And now I was in control. The battle with Mark wasn't over yet, but I was no longer afraid of him. He had underestimated me at every turn, thinking that I was weak, that I was just a woman in a wheelchair. But I had proven him wrong. I had shown him that I wasn't someone to be cast aside. I was stronger than he could ever imagine. The next step was clear. Mark needed to be held accountable for everything he'd done. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it.
Not now.
Not ever. It wasn't long before Mark's arrogance led him straight into a pit he couldn't crawl out of. I had already put the wheels in motion with my lawyer. We were going to make sure he was held accountable for his actions. Everything from the fraudulent claims to his cruel treatment of me. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. It was a few weeks after the police had removed Mark from the office that the next shocking turn of events came. My lawyer contacted me one morning, informing me that Mark had been trying to dig his way out of the mess he had created by calling in favors from people he thought would help him. But it wasn't working. The people he'd tried to manipulate had begun distancing themselves from him, including our old family friends. They weren't buying his lies anymore. The weight of his actions was finally catching up to him. I hadn't expected this to happen so quickly, but it felt like the universe was finally delivering the justice I'd been waiting for. Mark had lost more than his place in the company. His friends, his reputation, everything he had relied on was crumbling. The things he thought would save him, his wealth, his connections, were slipping through his fingers. And then, the final blow came. The media caught wind of the situation. Somehow, the story of Mark's betrayal, his false claims about the company, and his cruel actions toward me started to make waves. It didn't take long for the public to turn on him, and his so-called friends began to scatter. The company's board, too, started to ask questions. They wanted nothing to do with the mess he had caused. I made the decision to confront him one last time. I wasn't doing it for my own satisfaction, but because Mark needed to understand that actions have consequences. I wanted him to know that he couldn't just walk away and pretend nothing happened. I scheduled a meeting at the company. I was ready for this final confrontation, and I wasn't going to let him off the hook. I walked into the room with my lawyer by my side, and there he was, Mark, sitting across from me, his face pale, his shoulders hunched as if he already knew he was on the losing side. "Sophia," he started, his voice shaky. I didn't mean to." I cut him off. "Don't," I said firmly. "You've said enough. I don't need your excuses, Mark. You've shown me who you really are, and now you'll face the consequences." His expression twisted in panic. "I didn't steal anything. It's all a mistake." I reached into my bag and pulled out the recording I had made of his earlier conversation, the one where he had made derogatory comments about me and the company. I pressed play, and his own voice filled the room. "The worst thing you can do is marry an ugly woman. I'll tolerate it because she's rich and will make me rich." His voice echoed in the silence. I watched as his face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to come up with a defense that wouldn't come. "You're nothing but a liar and a fraud," I said. "And I'll make sure the world knows who you really are." Mark stood up suddenly, his anger flaring, but there was nothing he could do. He was caught in his own web of lies. He tried to deny it, tried to defend himself, but the damage was done. Before he could say another word, I turned to the security guard at the door. "Throw him out," I ordered. He hesitated for just a moment, then complied, escorting Mark out of the office. I looked at the police officer standing behind me, and with a clear, steady voice, I said, "Arrest him." Mark was still protesting as the officers cuffed him. His desperation was palpable, but it didn't matter. He had crossed the line one too many times. "Please don't do this," he pleaded from his knees, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Please." I looked at him, and for a moment, I saw the man I had once loved. But then, I remembered all the years of pain, the loneliness, the betrayal. I remembered the look on his face when he told me I was no longer useful to him. "No," I said, my voice cold. "You're not sorry. And I don't need someone like you in my life anymore." With that, I turned away. The officers let him out, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't need to explain myself any further. I had made my decision. I was moving on. As I stood in that office, now fully in control, I realized something. All the pain, all the betrayal, had brought me to this point, not just as the CEO of a $250 million company, but as a woman who had found her strength. I had been through so much, but I had come out stronger. Mark had tried to break me, but instead, he had unknowingly fueled my fire. I wasn't just the woman he had discarded. I was the woman who had reclaimed her life. I was free, and I was ready for whatever came next. I inherited a $5 million farmhouse from my late father. My greedy husband and mother-in-law stormed into the farmhouse and presented fake documents claiming ownership of the property. When I refused to accept the documents, they tied me to a tree with rope and burned my father's farmhouse. I was crying while they laughed and left me there alone. But after 2 hours, I gave them a horrific surprise they never expected. "My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how betrayal almost broke me but ultimately made me stronger. It all began the day my father passed away. He was my rock, my guide, and my source of unconditional love. Losing him left a gaping hole in my heart. But even in death, he left me a precious gift, the farmhouse. The farmhouse wasn't just any property. It was a $5 million estate nestled in the countryside, surrounded by rolling hills and trees that whispered secrets from generations past. My father used to say it was more than a home. It was a symbol of everything he'd worked hard for. He often reminded me, "This place is yours, Sarah. When I'm gone, make it your sanctuary." After his death, I decided to move into the farmhouse, hoping it would help me feel closer to him.
It did.
I spent my days walking through the fields, touching the walls of the home he built with his own hands, and reliving the memories of us sitting on the porch, talking about life. It was peaceful, until that evening when my life changed forever. I still remember the knock on the door. When I opened it, there stood my husband, Daniel, and his mother, Martha. They hadn't visited me at the farmhouse before, which immediately felt odd. Daniel, my husband of 5 years, had always been distant. He worked as a corporate manager in the city, constantly buried in his job. And Martha, well, she was a retired school teacher who never hid her disdain for me. She often reminded me that Daniel had married beneath himself. Over time, I learned to tune her out. But that evening, something was different. Their expressions were cold, their energy unsettling. "Sarah," Daniel said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." "What's going on?" I asked, watching Martha follow him with a smirk that made my stomach churn. Daniel pulled out a stack of papers and placed them on the kitchen table. "These are legal documents. Your father signed this property over to me and Mom before he died." I blinked, unable to process his words. "What are you talking about? That's not possible. My father would never." "He did," Martha interrupted, her voice sharp. "He wanted us to have this place. He knew you couldn't handle it alone." I felt my chest tighten as I picked up the papers. They looked official, with seals and signatures. But I knew my father better than anyone. He wouldn't have given away something so meaningful without telling me. "This is fake," I said firmly, pushing the papers back toward them. "I'm not signing anything. This property is mine." Daniel's jaw clenched, and his tone turned icy. "You don't know what you're talking about. These documents are legally binding." I stood my ground. "Then prove it in court. Until then, get out of my house." Martha's smirk disappeared, replaced by a scowl. "You ungrateful little," she began, but Daniel stopped her. "Fine," he said, his voice low and menacing. "But you'll regret this." As they stormed out, slamming the door behind them, I felt a pang of fear creep into my chest. Something about the way Daniel looked at me, cold and calculating, made me uneasy. But I pushed it aside. I thought their threats were empty words. I was wrong. A few days later, I returned home from a walk in the woods to find Daniel and Martha waiting for me in the driveway. This time, their anger was palpable. "We gave you a chance, Sarah," Daniel said, stepping closer. "Now you're forcing us to take matters into our own hands." I froze. "What are you talking about?" Before I could react, Martha grabbed my arm while Daniel pulled out a rope. Panic surged through me as they dragged me toward the large oak tree near the edge of the property. I screamed, but there was no one around to hear me. "You brought this on yourself," Martha sneered as they tied me tightly to the tree. "What are you doing?" I cried, my voice trembling. "Let me go." Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he lit a match. My eyes widened in horror as I realized his intention. "No," I screamed, struggling against the ropes. "Stop, please." The farmhouse, my sanctuary, went up in flames. I could only watch as the fire consumed everything my father had built. The smell of smoke and the crackling of wood filled the air, but the pain in my chest was worse. This wasn't just a home, it was the last connection I had to my father. And they were destroying it. When the fire raged high enough to light up the night sky, Daniel and Martha walked away, leaving me tied to the tree. "Enjoy the show," Martha said with a cruel laugh before disappearing into the darkness. For a moment, I thought it was the end. But then something inside me shifted. Fear turned into resolve. Betrayal burned in my veins like fuel, igniting a fire of my own. I wasn't going to let them win. The moment Daniel and Martha disappeared into the darkness, leaving me bound to that tree, I knew I had two choices: surrender to despair or fight for my life. The flames from the burning farmhouse roared in front of me, licking the night sky. The smoke was thick, making it hard to breathe. The farmhouse wasn't just a building, it was everything my father had worked for. Watching it collapse was like losing him all over again. But I couldn't let it end like this, not tied to a tree, defeated. My hands were bound tightly, the rope biting into my wrists. I twisted and pulled, ignoring the pain, determined to free myself. The firelight flickered across the property, casting eerie shadows. I focused on a jagged piece of bark sticking out of the tree. Gritting my teeth, I rubbed the rope against it, over and over, until my arms felt like lead. Just when I thought I couldn't go on, the rope began to fray. With one final pull, it snapped and I was free. My hands were raw and bleeding, but I didn't care. I stumbled forward, coughing and gasping for air. The fire was relentless, but I couldn't stop staring at it. My father's legacy was gone, reduced to ash by the people who were supposed to be my family. But as I stood there, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was angry, furious. I clenched my fists, vowing that I wouldn't let Daniel and Martha get away with this. They thought they'd won, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. The first thing I did was call the police. It felt surreal describing what had happened. My husband and his mother tied me to a tree and burned my house down. I told the officer on the phone. The disbelief in his voice was palpable, but I didn't care. Send someone, I insisted. I can prove everything. While I waited for the authorities, I began surveying the damage. The farmhouse was completely destroyed, nothing but blackened rubble. The heat from the fire still radiated, and the smell of smoke clung to the air. But then I spotted something that gave me hope. Near the edge of the property, the security camera I'd installed months ago still stood. Its casing was melted, but the memory card inside looked intact. When the police arrived, I handed over the memory card. This might have footage of them, I explained. The officers took it, promising to investigate. But I could tell they weren't convinced. Their skepticism was like a slap in the face, but I refused to let it deter me. After they left, I sat in my car trying to figure out my next move. My father had always told me, when life knocks you down, get back up stronger. His words echoed in my mind, giving me the strength I needed to keep going. If the police weren't going to take this seriously, I would build a case on my own. The first step was to prove that the documents Daniel and Martha used were fake. I went to a lawyer my father had trusted, Mr. Callahan. He was an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. "Sarah," he said after I explained everything, "this is serious. If those documents are fraudulent, we can prove it. But it'll take time." "I don't care how long it takes," I replied. "I need justice for my father." Mr. Callahan nodded. "Then let's get to work." Over the next few days, we dug into the documents Daniel had presented. It didn't take long to find glaring inconsistencies. The signatures didn't match my father's, and the dates were suspiciously close to his death. It was clear to me that Daniel and Martha had orchestrated this scheme, hoping I wouldn't fight back. But I wasn't stopping there. I started talking to neighbors and local workers who might have seen or heard something that night. To my relief, a few people remembered seeing Daniel and Martha's car parked near the property. One neighbor even mentioned hearing loud voices and a woman scream. Their testimonies added more weight to my case. Meanwhile, I retrieved the security footage from the memory card. Watching it made my stomach churn. There they were, Daniel and Martha, dragging me to the tree and setting the farmhouse on fire. Seeing their faces twisted with malice was like reliving the nightmare all over again. But instead of breaking me, it fueled my determination. Every step of the way, I felt my resolve hardening. Daniel and Martha had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, someone they could intimidate and silence. But they didn't realize that their betrayal had awakened a part of me I didn't know existed, a part that refused to back down. I began piecing everything together, the fake documents, the security footage, the witness testimonies. It was like assembling a puzzle, and with each new piece, I felt more confident. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about honoring my father's memory and making sure his legacy wasn't tarnished by greed and deceit. But even as I prepared for the battle ahead, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. What if the court didn't believe me? What if Daniel and Martha found a way to manipulate the system? I pushed those thoughts aside. "You're stronger than this," I told myself. "You've already survived the worst. Now it's time to fight back." The day after I compiled all my evidence, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but I could hear the venom beneath it. "Sarah," he said, "let's put this behind us. If you drop everything, we'll leave you alone. No harm done." I gripped the phone tightly, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You set my house on fire, Daniel. You tried to destroy everything my father left me. Do you really think I'd let you walk away?" He chuckled. "Suit yourself. Just remember, you started this." I hung up, my hands shaking. His threat was clear, but it didn't scare me. If anything, it solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to stop until Daniel and Martha paid for what they'd done. After Daniel's threatening phone call, I knew there was no turning back. The fear that once lingered in the pit of my stomach had transformed into determination. This was about more than the farmhouse. It was about standing up to the betrayal that had been thrust upon me and reclaiming the dignity my father had instilled in me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I worked closely with Mr. Callahan, my lawyer, who became my unwavering ally in the fight. Together, we refined the evidence I had gathered, ensuring every piece was as solid as a brick wall. The fake documents were the centerpiece of the case, and Mr. Callahan had them analyzed by a forensic document examiner. The results confirmed what I already knew. The signatures were forged, and the dates were manipulated. This alone could convict them of fraud, Mr. Callahan told me one afternoon as we sat in his cluttered office. But with everything else you've gathered, Sarah, they don't stand a chance. I nodded, clutching my cup of coffee tightly. They need to pay for what they did, not just for me, but for my father. He gave me a reassuring look. We'll make sure of that. The security footage was another crucial piece of evidence. Watching it was excruciating, but I knew it was necessary. It captured everything. The way Daniel and Martha tied me to the tree, the fire they started, and the cold, calculated expressions on their faces. Seeing it reminded me of the terror I felt that night, but it also reignited my anger. I handed the footage over to the police, who began their investigation in earnest. As the case gained traction, I started to feel a glimmer of hope. Witnesses from the neighborhood came forward to corroborate my story, strengthening the narrative that Daniel and Martha had orchestrated this vile act. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, recalled seeing smoke and the silhouette of two people leaving the property. Another neighbor remembered hearing voices arguing earlier in the evening. Their testimonies were the threads that tied the whole story together. But even as I built my case, I faced moments of doubt. Daniel and Martha were cunning, and I couldn't shake the fear that they might find a way to manipulate the system. My nights were restless, haunted by visions of the fire and the betrayal that had turned my life upside down. Every morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, reminding myself that this wasn't just for me, it was for my father's memory. The court date finally arrived. Standing in the courtroom, I felt a mix of emotions, anxiety, anger, and a fierce determination to see this through. Daniel and Martha sat on the other side of the room, their faces impassive. Daniel looked calm, almost smug, while Martha occasionally whispered to him. Their confidence only fueled my resolve. The prosecutor began laying out the evidence piece by piece. The forged documents were presented first, and the forensic expert testified to their authenticity, or lack thereof. His detailed explanation left no room for doubt. The signatures weren't my father's, and the dates were fabricated to give the illusion of legitimacy. Next came the security footage. As the video played on the screen, the courtroom fell silent. I couldn't bring myself to watch the screen, but I could feel the weight of the evidence pressing down on everyone in the room. When the video ended, the prosecutor turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is irrefutable proof of the defendant's actions that night. Their intentions were clear, their methods cruel. Witnesses followed, one after another, each recounting what they saw or heard that night. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to the arson and left little room for Daniel and Martha to argue their innocence. As the trial progressed, I began to feel a shift in the air. The smugness on Daniel's face started to fade, replaced by a flicker of unease. Martha's whispers grew more frantic, her composure cracking under the weight of the evidence. But the turning point came during cross-examination. The prosecutor questioned Daniel about his presence at the farmhouse that night. His responses were evasive, his usual charm failing him. When pressed further, he stumbled over his words, contradicting his earlier statements. "Mr. Daniel," the prosecutor said sharply, "isn't it true that you and your mother went to the farmhouse with the intent to claim it as your own, despite knowing the property rightfully belonged to Sarah?" Daniel hesitated, his confidence wavering. I don't recall." The prosecutor pounced. "You don't recall tying your wife to a tree? You don't recall setting fire to the house? Or do you not recall because you've been caught?" Martha, sitting beside him, muttered something under her breath, but the damage was done. The jury's eyes were fixed on Daniel, their expressions unyielding. When it was finally my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and stepped up to the stand. My hands trembled slightly, but I spoke with as much clarity as I could muster. I told the court about my father, the farmhouse, and the betrayal that had shattered my life. They didn't just burn down a building, I said, my voice firm despite the lump in my throat. They destroyed the memories, the legacy my father worked so hard to create. But I refused to let their greed and cruelty define my story. This isn't just about property, it's about justice. As I finished, the room was silent. The jury looked at me with a mixture of empathy and respect, and I felt a small flicker of hope. This wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I believed I might win. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt an odd sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that justice might actually be within reach. I had done everything I could to present the truth, and now it was up to the jury to decide. The courtroom was tense as the closing arguments began. The prosecutor stood with confidence, addressing the jury directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about greed and cruelty," he said. "It's about two individuals who betrayed someone they should have protected. Daniel and Martha didn't just forge documents and commit arson. They tried to destroy Sarah's spirit. But Sarah fought back, and the evidence proves that she is telling the truth. These defendants must be held accountable for their actions." The defense attorney's closing argument, on the other hand, was weak and desperate. He tried to discredit the security footage, calling it circumstantial, and claimed the witnesses were unreliable. But the jury's expressions told me they weren't buying it. The evidence was too damning, and the lies too obvious. After the closing arguments, the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate. Those hours felt like an eternity. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clasped tightly, as Daniel and Martha whispered to each other. Martha's smugness was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. Daniel kept glancing at me, but I refused to meet his gaze. Finally, the jury returned. The room fell silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. On the charge of fraud, the foreperson began, "We find the defendants, Daniel Roberts and Martha Roberts, guilty." My heart raced as the foreperson continued. "On the charge of arson, we find the defendants guilty. And on the charge of attempted harm, we find the defendants guilty." The words washed over me like a wave, leaving me breathless.
Guilty.
They were guilty on every count. I felt tears well up in my eyes, but I held them back. This wasn't the time for tears. This was the moment I had fought so hard for. The judge sentenced Daniel and Martha to lengthy prison terms, ensuring they wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else for a very long time. As they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Daniel looked back at me. His face was a mixture of anger and defeat. I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. Once they were gone, the weight on my chest began to lift. For the first time since that terrible night, I could breathe freely. The farmhouse might have been reduced to ashes, but my father's legacy wasn't gone. It lived on in my determination, in my fight for justice, and in the strength I had found within myself. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild, not just the farmhouse, but my life. With the insurance settlement and my inheritance intact, I began planning the restoration of the property. It wasn't just about rebuilding walls and roofs. It was about honoring my father and everything he stood for. The local community rallied around me, offering their support and encouragement. Neighbors who had testified during the trial became friends, and I realized that I wasn't alone. The farmhouse might have been isolated, but I wasn't. One day, as I stood on the property watching the workers lay the foundation for the new house, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. My father's words echoed in my mind, "When life knocks you down, get back up stronger." I had done just that. Looking back, I realized that Daniel and Martha's betrayal didn't destroy me. It transformed me. I found a strength I didn't know I had, and I learned that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about reclaiming what's yours and standing tall in the face of adversity. The farmhouse will never be the same, but it doesn't have to be. It will be a new home, a new chapter. And I will continue to honor my father's memory by living a life he would be proud of, one built on resilience, dignity, and truth. As I tell this story now, I hope it serves as a reminder to anyone facing betrayal and loss. You are stronger than you think. And even when everything seems lost, you can rise from the ashes. After the tragic death of my millionaire father, I visited his firm only to have his business partner claim ownership of the $80 million company. He showed me forged documents, ordered the security guards to throw me out, and warned me never to return. Determined to seek revenge, I made my move, and the very next morning, he woke up to a horrific surprise he could never have imagined. My name is Nancy Carter, and I never imagined that my life would take such a dramatic turn. I was just a regular 23-year-old university student, pursuing a degree in business administration at a prestigious college in Chicago. My dreams were big, like anyone my age, but they were nothing compared to the secure world my father had built for us. My father, Robert Carter, was my hero. He was hardworking, honest, and kind, a man respected by everyone who knew him. He was the co-owner and president of a highly successful firm valued at $80 million, which he had built alongside his business partner, Thomas Green. I used to look up to my father with immense pride. Watching him juggle work and family so effortlessly made me want to follow in his footsteps. But behind that perfect facade lay a betrayal so deep it would shatter everything. It started on a rainy night, the kind of night that makes you want to curl up with a book. I was at home with my mom, Helen Carter, while my dad attended a business dinner with Thomas. He had mentioned the meeting briefly earlier that day, saying they were finalizing some important deals. Dad seemed a little tense, but I didn't think much of it. He always carried the weight of the business on his shoulders. The next morning, I woke up to my mom sobbing uncontrollably. I froze when I heard her say the words, "Your father is gone." My world turned upside down. The doctors said he had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest during dinner. It didn't make sense. Dad was fit, healthy, and full of life. How could this happen so suddenly? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, but at that moment, grief consumed me. We had to arrange the funeral and figure out how to move forward without the man who was the center of our lives. Days turned into weeks, and Mom and I tried to pick up the pieces. It was then that we received a letter from Thomas, inviting us to the firm. He claimed there were important matters to discuss regarding Dad's shares. For the first time since Dad's death, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Thomas was stepping up to help us during this difficult time. We walked into the firm, expecting sympathy, maybe even kindness. Instead, we were met with cold indifference. Thomas sat behind my father's desk, his eyes hard and calculating. He didn't even pretend to soften the blow. "Your father transferred full ownership of the firm to me before he died," he said bluntly, sliding a stack of documents across the desk. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's impossible," I shot back. "My father would never do that." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression smug. "Well, he did. It's all here in black and white. You can check with any lawyer you want, but I assure you, it's legitimate." I felt my blood boil. My mom tried to reason with him, pleading for him to explain. But Thomas wasn't interested in explanations. He ordered the security guards to escort us out of the building. The humiliation stung almost as much as the betrayal. The man my father had trusted as a partner had turned on us, and now he controlled everything. Outside the building, I held my mother close as she sobbed. My own tears refused to fall. Instead, something inside me snapped. I was angry, not just at Thomas, but at myself for not seeing this coming. How could someone my father trusted so deeply do this to us? More than that, how could he possibly claim my father had willingly handed over the firm? I knew I couldn't let this slide. I owed it to my dad to find out the truth. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I made a silent vow. I would uncover whatever Thomas was hiding, no matter what it took. My first step was hiring someone who could do what I couldn't, a private investigator. I reached out to James Harper, a man known for his tenacity and skill in uncovering hidden truths. When I told him my story, he listened intently, his sharp eyes betraying the wheels turning in his mind. "Nancy," he said after I finished. If there's foul play involved, I'll find it. But you need to prepare yourself. This won't be easy. I nodded. I'm ready for whatever it takes. The days ahead were daunting. James began digging into Thomas's background, scouring financial records and interviewing people who worked at the firm. Meanwhile, I started brushing up on legal procedures, knowing that I would need a strong case if we uncovered anything. The more I learned about my father's business dealings, the clearer it became that Thomas had been planning this for a long time. I couldn't share much of this with my mom. She was still fragile, struggling to cope with Dad's death. But I felt a growing determination. If there was even a shred of truth in my suspicions, I would bring Thomas down. He thought he could destroy my father's legacy and get away with it. He thought wrong. And so, the first chapter of my fight for justice began. Little did I know this was only the tip of the iceberg. There were secrets buried so deep that even I wasn't prepared for the full truth. But one thing was certain. I would stop at nothing to see my father's name cleared and his betrayer brought to justice. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind of emotions, anger, grief, and a relentless drive for justice. After my father's sudden death and Thomas's betrayal, I knew I couldn't let things rest. Every day, I replayed Thomas's smug expression in my mind, and it fueled my determination. My father didn't deserve this. Not the way he died, not the lies, and certainly not the theft of everything he had worked so hard to build. James Harper, the private investigator I had hired, became my lifeline. I'll never forget the first phone call he made after beginning the investigation. "Nancy, I think you were right," James said. His voice was calm, but edged with seriousness. "There's something suspicious here." That one sentence gave me a glimmer of hope. "What did you find?" "Not everything yet," he replied, "but I've dug into some of the firm's financial records. Things don't add up. There are discrepancies, money moving around in strange ways right before your father's death. I also found something interesting about Thomas. Let's just say he's not as clean as he pretends to be." I gripped the phone tightly. "What do you mean?" "Thomas has been in debt for years," James explained. "Gambling mostly. His losses are enormous. He's been using the firm's money to cover it up, but it looks like your father was starting to catch on. I think that's why Thomas made his move when he did." Hearing this sent a chill down my spine. My dad had always been so careful about the business, always transparent and honest. The thought of him realizing his partner was stealing from him, and possibly even confronting him, made my chest tighten. I didn't know how far Thomas's betrayal truly went, but I was beginning to understand the depth of his greed. James wasn't done. "I'm still looking into the night your father died," he said. "There's something strange about the timing and how everything unfolded. I'll need more time to confirm it, but I believe Thomas had a hand in more than just stealing the firm." That statement lingered with me long after we hung up. Could Thomas have been responsible for my father's death? It seemed unthinkable, but then again, so did everything else he had done. Over the next few weeks, James continued to dig deeper. Meanwhile, I began preparing for the legal battle I knew was coming. I reached out to John Reynolds, a lawyer known for taking on difficult cases. When I told him about my situation, he didn't hesitate. "Nancy," he said during our first meeting, "this is going to be a tough fight. Thomas has money, resources, and now control of the firm. But if what you're saying is true, and if we can prove it, we have a chance." I nodded. "I don't care how long it takes. I'm not giving up." Working with John and James gave me a sense of purpose, but it didn't erase the pain of losing my father. Every time I walked past his photograph at home, I felt a pang of guilt. I should have been there for him more. I should have noticed the signs. But then I reminded myself, I was doing this for him. I was fighting to preserve his legacy. The breakthrough came one evening when James called me, his voice more urgent than usual. "Nancy, I found something big." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I got my hands on surveillance footage from the restaurant where your father had his last meal with Thomas," he said. "It shows Thomas slipping something into your father's drink." I froze, unable to process what I was hearing. "You're sure?"
Yes.
"It's clear as day," James confirmed. "Your father started showing symptoms shortly after that." I've also spoken to the restaurant staff. One of the waiters remembers Thomas being unusually insistent about serving your father himself. The truth hit me like a freight train. Thomas hadn't just stolen the firm. He had murdered my father to do it. I felt a mix of rage and despair, but there was no time to dwell on my emotions. We finally had the evidence we needed to expose him. James didn't stop there. He dug up forged documents Thomas had created to claim ownership of the firm. They were clumsy enough to raise suspicion but convincing enough to fool most people at a glance. Together with the financial discrepancies, the surveillance footage, and testimonies from coerced employees, we had a solid case. With everything in hand, John began building our legal strategy. He filed charges against Thomas for murder, forgery, fraud, and embezzlement. The court issued a warrant for his arrest, but I wanted something more. I wanted Thomas to face the humiliation he had subjected my family to. We planned a dramatic move. On the day of Thomas's arrest, James and I showed up at the firm. I walked through the doors that had once felt like home, now tainted by betrayal. Thomas was sitting at my father's desk, as smug as ever. When he saw me, his expression turned cold. "What are you doing here? I told you never to step foot in this building again." I met his glare with steady eyes. "I'm here to watch justice catch up with you." Before he could respond, the police stormed in. The sight of Thomas being handcuffed in front of the employees, people who had admired my father, was both satisfying and heartbreaking. As they led him away, he shouted protests, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But I knew the truth, and soon everyone else would too. That day marked the beginning of the end for Thomas Green. But for me, it was just the beginning of a long fight to clear my father's name and take back what rightfully belonged to my family. Little did I know, there were still more battles ahead. When Thomas was arrested, I thought the hard part was over. I was wrong. It was only the beginning of a legal battle that would test my patience, resilience, and belief in justice. Watching Thomas being led out of the firm in handcuffs gave me some satisfaction, but it didn't erase the damage he had done to my family. There was still so much to fix, and the fight was far from over. The charges against Thomas were serious: murder, forgery, fraud, and embezzlement. But his arrogance didn't waver. From the start, he denied everything, claiming he was being framed. His high-priced legal team painted him as a victim of unfortunate circumstances, someone who had only ever worked in the best interest of the firm. Listening to his lies in the courtroom was infuriating, but I held on to the confidence I had in our evidence and the people supporting me. John Reynolds, my lawyer, was relentless. He presented the evidence James Harper, the investigator, had gathered. The surveillance footage of Thomas slipping something into my father's drink, the financial records showing embezzlement, the forged documents claiming ownership of the firm, and the testimonies from employees who had been coerced by Thomas. It was a mountain of evidence, and every piece told the same story. Thomas Green's greed had driven him to murder my father and steal everything he had built. Still, the trial wasn't easy. Thomas's lawyers did everything they could to discredit our case. They argued that the surveillance footage was unclear, that the financial discrepancies could have been bookkeeping errors, and that the documents were legitimate. They even tried to tarnish my father's reputation, suggesting that he might have had undisclosed debts or made poor business decisions. Those were the hardest moments for me, sitting there and listening to strangers question my father's integrity. It took everything in me not to scream at them. But John was prepared for every tactic they used. He countered their arguments with precision and calm, exposing every lie for what it was. The turning point came when one of the firm's employees, a young accountant named Sarah, decided to testify against Thomas. She had been hesitant at first, scared of retaliation, but she finally found the courage to speak up. "I worked under Mr. Green for 3 years," Sarah said in court, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "He forced me to alter financial records. He threatened to ruin my career if I didn't comply. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared." When Mr. Carter started asking questions, Thomas became paranoid. He said Mr. Carter was too nosy and that he'd take care of it. Her testimony was a damning blow to Thomas's defense. Combined with the evidence we had already presented, It painted a clear picture of his guilt. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. His confidence wavered, and his lawyers began to stumble in their arguments. The trial dragged on for weeks, but I stayed strong. My mother, Helen, was by my side every step of the way. She didn't always say much, but her presence was a comfort. She reminded me of why I was fighting so hard, to clear my father's name and protect the legacy he had built for us. When the verdict finally came, it felt like the air in the courtroom had turned electric. The judge's voice was firm and unyielding as he read the decision. Thomas Green was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder, forgery, and fraud. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but all I could do was sit there, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. Relief, grief, and vindication washed over me in waves. The judge also ruled that the forged documents were invalid, and ownership of the firm was restored to me and my mother. That moment felt surreal. After everything we had been through, justice had prevailed. My father's name was cleared, and the firm was finally back where it belonged. But even as I walked out of the courtroom that day, I knew my work wasn't done. The firm had been damaged under Thomas's control, and there was a lot to rebuild. Employees were still reeling from the chaos he had caused, and trust needed to be restored. I couldn't let my father's legacy end here. I stood outside the courthouse, looking up at the sky. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. "But there's still more to do. I promise I'll make you proud." And with that promise in my heart, I prepared myself for the next chapter. The battle for justice was over, but the journey to rebuild my father's dream was just beginning. After the courtroom victory, I felt a sense of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of what lay ahead. The firm my father had built, a business worth $80 million, was in shambles after Thomas's mismanagement. Employees were disillusioned, contracts had been mishandled, and the reputation of the company had taken a hit. It wasn't just about reclaiming ownership. I now had the responsibility of rebuilding everything my father had worked so hard to create. The first time I walked into the firm as its rightful owner, it felt bittersweet. The memories of visiting the office as a child with my dad came rushing back, but the energy was different now. The employees who once greeted me with warmth now looked unsure, even wary. I understood their hesitation. Thomas's betrayal had left scars on everyone. I gathered the entire team for a meeting. Standing in the same room where my father had once addressed his employees, I spoke from my heart. "I know the past few months have been incredibly difficult for all of you," I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "My father built this firm with integrity and honesty. He cared deeply about each and every one of you, and he would never have allowed the kind of chaos that Thomas brought here. I'm here to fix what's broken and honor my father's legacy, but I can't do it alone. I need your trust and your support." There was a moment of silence, and then one by one, the employees began to nod. A few even smiled. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few months, I threw myself into rebuilding the company. I leaned heavily on the senior staff members who had worked closely with my father. They were the heart of the firm, and their loyalty and expertise were invaluable. I also reached out to the clients who had distanced themselves during Thomas's reign, assuring them that the firm was under new and trustworthy management. It wasn't easy. There were days when I doubted myself, wondering if I was capable of filling my father's shoes. But every time I felt like giving up, I remembered the promises I had made to my father, to my mother, and to myself. This wasn't just about running a business. It was about preserving a legacy. One day, while going through old files in my father's office, I found a notebook. It was filled with his handwritten plans and ideas for the firm. He had dreams of expanding the company, taking it to new heights, but he had been held back by Thomas's greed and interference. Reading his words filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do. I began implementing some of my father's ideas, blending them with the business knowledge I had gained in university. The changes weren't always met with immediate enthusiasm, but slowly, the results began to show. The firm started to regain its footing, winning back contracts and restoring its reputation. The employees, too, began to trust me. They saw how much I cared about the company and how hard I was working to make things right. One day, during a team meeting, one of the older staff members stood up and said, "Your father would be proud of you, Nancy." That simple statement brought tears to my eyes. Amid all this, my mother, Helen, became my biggest supporter. She stepped in to help with administrative tasks, proving that strength runs deep in our family. Watching her resilience inspired me to keep pushing forward. Meanwhile, the fallout from Thomas's arrest continued. His assets were seized, and he faced additional lawsuits from other victims of his schemes. It was clear that his downfall was complete. Occasionally, I wondered if I could ever truly forgive him for what he had done, but the answer always came back as no. Some betrayals are too deep, and the damage he caused to my family would never be forgotten. Months turned into a year, and slowly but surely, the firm began to thrive again. The employees started referring to me as President Carter, a title that initially felt strange, but soon became a source of pride. My father's dreams of expansion, which once seemed impossible, now felt within reach. I could feel his presence in every decision I made, guiding me, encouraging me. One evening, as I was locking up the office, I found myself standing in front of my father's portrait. The weight of everything hit me all at once: the betrayal, the fight for justice, and the long road to rebuilding. I touched the frame and whispered, "We did it, Dad. The firm is ours again, and I promise I'll keep building on what you started." In that moment, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been long and painful, but it had also made me stronger. I had faced betrayal, fought for justice, and reclaimed my family's legacy. And now, as the leader of the firm, I was ready to honor my father's memory and create a future that he would be proud of. This was more than a victory. It was a new beginning. After the tragic death of my parents, my cruel mother-in-law treated me like a slave. During a family gathering, she called me a poor abandoned girl, and my husband laughed at me. Then, suddenly, an old wealthy man entered the venue and said, "Embrace me, my daughter." Everyone was stunned. But when he delivered his next shocking surprise, my husband and mother-in-law were on their knees. My name is Lisa, and my life has been anything but ordinary. Growing up in Denver, Colorado, I used to think my world was perfect. But everything changed when I was just 8 years old. A fire swept through our home one night while we were all asleep. The flames swallowed everything: the walls, the furniture, and worst of all, my parents. I can still hear their voices calling out to me through the smoke, but I never saw them again. That night, my entire life burned to ashes, leaving me with nothing but questions and pain. With no family to take me in, I was placed in the foster care system. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I thought someone would come for me, a grandparent, an aunt, maybe even a family friend. But nobody came. I was just a little girl, abandoned and alone, moving from one foster home to another. Each family was different, but none of them felt like home. Some were kind, others indifferent, and a few downright cold. For 5 years, I lived that way, never settling, always hoping for something better. That something better finally came when I was 13. A couple, the Carters, visited the group home I was staying at. They weren't like the other people I'd met before. Mr. Carter had a warm, fatherly smile, and Mrs. Carter's eyes sparkled with kindness. They owned a thriving technology business in Denver, and though they were incredibly successful, they seemed down to earth. When they chose to adopt me, I couldn't believe it. For the first time in years, I had parents again, people who loved me and wanted me to succeed. Life with the Carters was like stepping into a different world. Their house was enormous, with rooms I didn't even know what to do with. But more than the material comforts, they gave me love, guidance, and security. They encouraged me to dream big and always reminded me that I was capable of achieving anything. Despite their wealth, they taught me the value of hard work and humility. I worked hard in school and managed to get a full scholarship to a prestigious college in Boulder, where I studied environmental science. It was there, during my sophomore year, that I met Jack. He was studying engineering, and we had a few mutual friends. Jack was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: charming, funny, and endlessly supportive. He had this way of making me feel special, like I was the only person in the room. One day, after class, Jack came up to me and said, "Lisa, I've noticed you're always the first one to ask questions during lectures. What's your secret? Do you have a time machine or something?" I laughed, and that was the start of everything. We began spending time together, studying, grabbing coffee, and talking about everything from our favorite movies to our biggest dreams. Jack told me he came from a wealthy family in Chicago. His parents, Amanda and Robert, owned several luxury hotels and were known for their glamorous parties and high society connections. "They're a little particular about people," Jack admitted once when we were talking about our families. At the time, I didn't think much of it. After all, Jack seemed different, grounded and kind. As our relationship grew, I hesitated to tell Jack about my past. I didn't want to be seen as the poor abandoned girl he needed to save. So I avoided the topic, focusing instead on the life I was building with him. By the time we graduated, Jack and I were inseparable. He proposed during a hike in the Rockies, and I said yes, without hesitation. I believed we could handle anything as long as we were together. But reality has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. The first crack in our perfect world appeared when Jack wanted me to meet his parents. I was excited but also nervous. Jack warned me, "They can be tough. Just be yourself and everything will be fine." I tried to push my worries aside, reminding myself that Jack loved me and that his parents' opinions didn't matter. The dinner was held at one of their luxury hotels in Chicago. The moment I walked in, I felt like I didn't belong. The room was filled with chandeliers, polished floors, and people dressed in designer clothes. Amanda greeted me with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes, while Robert barely acknowledged me. Throughout the evening, they spoke only to Jack, treating me as if I were invisible. When Amanda finally addressed me, her words were sharp. "So, Lisa," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Jack tells us you studied on a scholarship. Impressive. But I assume that's because there wasn't much of a family fortune to fall back on, was theirs?" I felt my cheeks burn, but I forced a polite smile. "I've been fortunate to have great support from my adoptive parents," I replied, trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Amanda's expression hardened. "Adoptive parents, you say? How charitable of them." Jack's silence during the exchange stung more than Amanda's words. I had always thought he would defend me, but instead, he stared down at his plate, avoiding my gaze. As we left the dinner, I couldn't hold back my tears. "Jack, why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I didn't want to make a scene," he replied, looking uncomfortable. "They'll come around. Just give them time." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a storm I wasn't prepared for. I tried to convince myself that Jack was right, that his parents just needed time to get to know me. But deep down, I felt uneasy. Amanda and Robert's disapproving stares and veiled comments replayed in my mind. I told myself to be patient, to focus on the love Jack and I shared. But patience can only take you so far when you're constantly made to feel small. The weeks after that dinner were tense. Jack began spending more time on work projects, and I felt like I was losing the connection we once had. I tried talking to him about how his parents made me feel, but his responses were always the same. "It's just how they are, Lisa. Don't take it personally." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one being judged. When his parents hosted another dinner, this time at their estate in Chicago, Jack insisted we attend. "It's important to them, Lisa. They want us to be part of the family," he said. I reluctantly agreed, hoping this could be an opportunity to mend things. Walking into their sprawling mansion, I felt out of place again. The walls were adorned with expensive art, the kind you'd only see in galleries. As Amanda greeted us, her icy demeanor returned. "Lisa," she said with a forced smile, "how nice of you to join us." Her tone made it clear it wasn't nice at all. Throughout the evening, Amanda and Robert barely acknowledged me. When they did, it was only to make pointed remarks. "You know," Amanda said at one point, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "Jack has always had such exquisite taste. It's surprising, isn't it?" I wanted to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Jack, as usual, said nothing. Later that night, I pulled Jack aside. "Why don't you ever stand up for me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Do you not see how they treat me?" Jack sighed, clearly frustrated. "Lisa, you're reading too much into it. They're just traditional. They'll warm up eventually." "Traditional?" I snapped. "They called me Charity. How much more obvious can they make it that they don't want me here?" Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I love you, Lisa. Isn't that enough?" I didn't answer, because in that moment, I wasn't sure if it was. Weeks turned into months, and things didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. Jack's parents hosted a grand anniversary party, inviting hundreds of their high society friends. When Jack asked me to come, I hesitated. "Do you really want me there?" I asked. "Of course," he said, almost offended. "You're my fiancé." The party was held at a luxury ballroom in downtown Chicago. From the moment we arrived, it was clear I wasn't welcome. Guests whispered behind their champagne glasses, giving me sideways glances. I tried to stay close to Jack, but he was swept away in conversations with his parents and their friends. Every time I tried to join a group, I was met with cold stares or outright dismissal. By the time Amanda and Robert gave their anniversary speech, I was holding back tears. They thanked everyone for being an important part of their lives, pointedly excluding me. Then came the jokes, thinly veiled insults aimed directly at me. "Jack has always had a soft spot for projects," Amanda quipped, causing laughter to ripple through the room. I felt like I was shrinking, like every eye in the room was on me, mocking me. Unable to take it anymore, I quietly left the party. I ordered a rideshare and cried the entire way home. When Jack came back later that night, he was furious. "Do you know how embarrassing that was for me?" he shouted. "For you?" I shot back. "What about me? Do you know how humiliating it was to be laughed at in front of all those people?" "You could have just stayed and dealt with it," he said, his tone sharp. "It was one night, Lisa. Couldn't you have done that for me?" I stared at him, stunned. This wasn't the Jack I fell in love with. "Your parents humiliated me, Jack. And instead of standing up for me, you're blaming me for leaving?" "They're my parents," he said firmly. "You don't just walk out on them." I felt a crack deep inside me, like something fundamental between us had broken. I slept on the couch that night, too hurt to even look at him. The following weeks were a blur of silence and tension. Jack continued attending his parents' weekly family dinners, but I stayed home. Every time he left, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I knew I was losing him, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my dignity for a relationship that felt increasingly one-sided. One evening, after another family dinner, Jack came home with a smug expression. "My parents expect an apology from you," he said, crossing his arms. "An apology?" I repeated, incredulous. "For what?" "For embarrassing them at the party," he said matter-of-factly. "And while you're at it, I think I deserve one too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "They insulted me, Jack. They insulted us. And you think I should apologize?" "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "It's the least you can do to make things right." Something inside me snapped. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." "What do you mean?" Jack asked, his voice softening. "I mean, I can't keep pretending this is okay," I replied. "I can't keep fighting for someone who won't fight for me." Jack didn't respond. He just stared at me, as if he didn't know the woman standing in front of him. That night, I called my parents. Through tears, I told them everything. "We'll take care of it," my dad said, his voice steady. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I'll never forget the phone call I had with my parents that night. I poured out all the pain I'd been holding in, the insults, the judgment, and Jack's complete lack of support. My dad, calm and thoughtful as always, listened quietly before saying, "Lisa, no one has the right to treat you this way. You deserve better, and we'll make sure they understand that." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I trusted him. My parents had always been my rock, and I knew they wouldn't let me face this alone. A few days later, they arrived in Chicago. Seeing them again was like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. My mom hugged me tightly, and my dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "We're here for you," my mom said firmly. "And it's time we set some things straight." My parents and I spent the next few days together, talking and planning. They made it clear that this wasn't just about standing up to Jack's family, it was about me reclaiming my self-worth. "Lisa, you've worked so hard to build a life for yourself," my dad said. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than what you are." When I told them about the weekly family dinners Jack's parents hosted, my dad's eyes lit up.
"Perfect," he said.
"We'll join them this week." I hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked. The thought of my parents confronting Amanda and Robert made me nervous. "Trust us," my mom said. "They need to see the real Lisa, the Lisa we know and love." The dinner was scheduled at an exclusive restaurant downtown. Jack had gone ahead without me, as usual, but this time, I didn't stay home. Dressed in a simple but elegant outfit, I walked into the restaurant with my parents by my side. The moment we approached the table, all conversation stopped. Amanda and Robert froze, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. "Good evening," my dad said smoothly, his tone polite but firm. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Mr. Carter, Lisa's father. This is my wife." Amanda's smile was tight and strained. "Oh, Mr. Carter. What a surprise," she said, her voice faltering. "We didn't realize you were in town." "We thought it was time we met," my mom said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "After all, you've had so much to say about our daughter." Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. "It's, good to meet you. Jack didn't mention you'd be coming." "I'm sure he didn't," my dad replied, taking a seat. "But we're here now, and there are some things we need to discuss." Jack looked like he wanted to disappear. He avoided my gaze, fiddling with his napkin as my dad turned to Amanda and Robert. "I understand you've had concerns about Lisa," he said. "I'd like to hear them." Amanda's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "We've simply been trying to ensure that Jack's future is secure," she said. "It's nothing personal." "Nothing personal," my mom echoed, her voice sharp. "Calling her a poor abandoned girl isn't personal?" Amanda flushed. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," my dad interrupted. "But let me set the record straight. Lisa is our daughter, and she's been part of a family far stronger and more successful than you seem to realize." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a portfolio, placing it on the table. Inside were documents detailing the Carter family business, its growth, its partnerships, and its considerable wealth. Amanda and Robert exchanged stunned looks as they skimmed the papers. "You judged Lisa without knowing anything about her," my dad continued. "You assumed she wasn't good enough for your son because of where she came from. But let me tell you, Lisa's worth isn't tied to wealth or status. It's tied to her strength, her kindness, and her integrity, qualities I'm not sure this family understands." Amanda tried to speak, but my mom cut her off. "You've made Lisa feel like an outsider, but the truth is, she's out of your league. And now that you know the truth, I hope you'll think twice before passing judgment on someone you don't know." My dad then turned to Jack, his expression cold. "Lisa asked me to give you this," he said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside were the divorce papers I had signed earlier that day. Jack looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Lisa," he said, his voice breaking. "We can fix this." "No, Jack," I said, my voice steady. "You had your chance to fix it. But every time your family tore me down, you stood by and said nothing. I deserve better than that." For the first time, I felt free. As my parents and I stood to leave, Amanda and Robert remained silent, their faces pale. Jack didn't follow me, and I didn't look back. Walking out of that restaurant with my parents felt like shedding a weight I'd carried for far too long. For the first time in years, I could breathe. As we drove away, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt relief. My dad glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "How do you feel, Lisa?" he asked gently.
"Free," I said.
And I meant it. The days following that dinner were a whirlwind. Jack signed the divorce papers without hesitation. Part of me thought he might fight for us, but I guess I already knew the answer. He had made his choice long ago, every time he stood silent while his family tore me apart. His parents, however, weren't as accepting of the situation. They bombarded me with messages, some angry, others pleading. "Tell your dad to back off," one text from Amanda read. "He's ruining us." It didn't take long for my dad's influence to take effect. My parents' company had strong ties with several of the investors and partners that Robert and Amanda relied on for their hotel business. One by one, those partnerships dissolved. The family empire they had built on arrogance and elitism began to crumble, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I didn't feel guilty. They had mocked me for being a poor abandoned girl, and now they were learning what it felt like to be powerless. Meanwhile, my life was starting to take a new shape. My parents insisted on taking me on a trip to California, a much-needed escape from the chaos of the past few months. We spent days walking along sunny beaches, hiking through breathtaking trails, and talking late into the night. It was exactly what I needed to heal. My mom reminded me constantly that I was loved, and my dad encouraged me to think about my future. "You're strong, Lisa," he said one evening as we watched the sun set over the ocean. "And this is just the beginning for you." He was right. The experience with Jack and his family had taught me so much about myself. I realized how much I had sacrificed to make a relationship work with someone who didn't truly value me. It wasn't just about Jack's silence or his parents' cruelty. It was about my own belief that I had to prove my worth to people who would never see it. I promised myself I would never let that happen again. When we returned to Denver, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a new apartment, started a job with an environmental nonprofit, and reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. My parents continued to support me every step of the way, always reminding me that I was never alone. As for Jack and his family, I didn't hear much about them after the divorce was finalized. I did learn through mutual acquaintances that their financial troubles continued to worsen, and their lavish lifestyle became less sustainable. Part of me thought I'd feel satisfaction in hearing that, but in truth, I didn't care. I was too busy moving forward to dwell on their downfall. Looking back now, I see that chapter of my life as both painful and transformative. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when it comes from someone you thought would always stand by you. But resilience runs deeper. I found strength in my pain and turned it into something powerful, a new beginning, a fresh start. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: self-respect is not negotiable. You can't force someone to see your worth, and you shouldn't have to. The people who truly care for you will never make you question it. My parents taught me that, and for that, I will always be grateful. Today, I'm proud of the person I've become. I've left behind the toxic relationships and the need for validation from others. My story isn't one of defeat, it's one of triumph. And as I stand here, looking ahead to the future, I know that the best is yet to come.